They told her to dance or die. Elena Voss had cleaned blood from marble floors, sewn bullets out of expensive suits, and lived invisible in a mansion full of monsters for 7 years. She never asked questions, never made eye contact, never existed. But tonight, dragged onto a stage in front of New York's most dangerous men, with a gun aimed at her chest and cruel laughter ringing in her ears, the housemaid did something no one expected. She smiled. Not in fear, not in surrender, in defiance. Because Elena Voss had survived worse than Lucian Vale, and tonight he was about to find out why. If you want to see how a single dance changes everything, stay until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. What? The gunshot echoed through the Vale Mansion's grand ballroom 3 seconds before midnight, and Elena Voss didn't even flinch. She was used to gunfire, used to screams, used to the particular silence that followed violence in a house where death wore expensive cologne and spoke in whispers. What she wasn't used to was being seen. For 7 years, Elena had perfected the art of invisibility. She moved through the mansion like smoke, there when needed, gone before anyone could remember her face. She scrubbed blood from imported Italian tile. She burned clothing that carried too many questions. She kept her eyes down, her mouth shut, and her existence small enough to slip through the cracks of a world that devoured the careless. Tonight, that protection shattered like champagne crystal on marble. "Everyone, your attention, please!" The voice cut through the ballroom's opulent chaos with practiced authority. Victoria Vale stood on the raised platform at the room's center, her crimson gown catching light like fresh blood, her smile sharp enough to draw it. Lucien's younger sister, the family's beautiful nightmare. Elena pressed herself against the silk-papered wall near the servants' entrance, champagne tray balanced perfectly despite her suddenly unsteady hands. Around her, 300 of New York's most dangerous people turned toward Victoria's voice like predators scenting weakness. This was supposed to be a simple assignment: serve drinks, stay invisible, survive. "As you all know," Victoria continued, her voice carrying across the room with theatrical precision, "tonight we celebrate not just my dear brother's 35th birthday, but the Vale family's continued dominance in our particular sphere of influence." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Dark, knowing. The kind of laughter that understood exactly what sphere of influence meant when it came to the Vale Empire. Elena had seen enough in 7 years to fill a graveyard. The Vale family didn't just control territory. They owned people, politicians, judges, entire city blocks. They moved money that didn't exist through businesses that shouldn't be legal. They solved problems with bullets and buried mistakes in concrete. And Lucian Vale stood at the center of it all. Elena's gaze found him despite her best efforts not to look. He stood near the ballroom's eastern windows, silhouetted against the Manhattan skyline, surrounded by men who radiated violence like heat. Even in a room full of predators, Lucian Vale stood apart. 35 years old. 6 feet 3 inches of controlled menace wrapped in custom tailoring that probably cost more than Elena had earned in her entire life. Dark hair worn just long enough to suggest he didn't give a damn about trends. Eyes so pale they looked almost colorless. Glacier blue, someone had once called them, before Lucian had them removed from the payroll for talking too much. Elena had learned early not to meet those eyes, not to exist in his line of sight. For 7 years she'd succeeded. Tonight, her luck ran out. But before we continue the festivities, Victoria's voice dropped to a purr that made Elena's skin crawl, "I thought we might have some entertainment. Something special, something authentic." The way Victoria said authentic made it sound like a threat. Elena began backing toward the servants' entrance, but the door had been blocked by 2 of Victoria's personal security. Her stomach dropped. "You see, earlier this evening, I discovered something fascinating." Victoria gestured toward the ballroom's northern wall, where a series of paintings hung in gilded frames. "I found one of our staff standing in front of my late grandmother's portrait, the one of her dancing Swan Lake at the Mariinsky Theater before she married into this family." Elena's blood turned to ice. She'd only stopped for a moment, just one moment, drawn by the painting of a woman mid-pirouette, suspended in impossible grace. She'd been careful. She'd been quick, not quick enough. And I thought, what perfect timing. Victoria's smile widened. "We have live music. We have an audience of the city's most distinguished guests. And we have," she turned, scanning the crowd, those predator eyes landing directly on Elena. We have a volunteer. No, Elena whispered, but the word disappeared into the sudden surge of interest from the crowd. Victoria's security moved before Elena could run. Two men, built like concrete walls, grabbed her arms and dragged her through the parting crowd toward the stage. The champagne tray clattered to the floor, crystals shattering, golden liquid spreading across marble like spilled secrets. Please! Elena tried to dig in her heels, but they lifted her off the ground like she weighed nothing. I wasn't. Oh, don't be modest, Victoria crooned as they deposited Elena at the stage's edge. I'm sure you have many hidden talents. After all, you've been watching us for 7 years, learning our routines, observing our lives. Her voice hardened. Perhaps it's time we observed yours. The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the scent of humiliation. Elena recognized faces from newspapers, from federal investigations, from her nightmares. Drug distributors, money launderers, men and women who'd ordered deaths over dinner and never lost sleep. And standing at the back of the crowd, still as a statue, watching with those glacier eyes, Lucian Vale. Strip off that ridiculous uniform, Victoria commanded. Let's see what we're working with. Elena's hands shook as she fumbled with her black service dress. Underneath, she wore the only nice thing she owned, a simple slip dress in dark blue, bought from a thrift store 3 years ago and carefully maintained. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't designed for performance. It would have to be enough. Pathetic, Victoria laughed, and the crowd echoed her amusement. This is what passes for entertainment in your world? A maid in a second-hand dress? Elena's face burned, but she kept her eyes down. Survival rule number 1, don't react. Don't give them more ammunition. Still, Victoria mused, circling Elena like a shark, you seemed so entranced by that painting. Tell me, can you actually dance? Or were you just pretending to appreciate art you couldn't possibly understand? The question was a trap. Every instinct Elena had developed screamed at her to lie, to claim ignorance, to make herself smaller. But something in the way Victoria's lips curved, the absolute certainty of Elena's humiliation, sparked something dark and reckless in her chest. I can dance, Elena said quietly. The ballroom went silent. Victoria's eyebrows rose. What was that? Elena lifted her chin, meeting Victoria's eyes for the first time. I said I can dance. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. In 7 years, Elena Voss had never spoken above a whisper, had never looked anyone directly in the eye, had never ever challenged a veil. Victoria's smile turned cruel. Prove it. She snapped her fingers, and the 12-piece orchestra at the ballroom's far end shuffled their sheet music. The conductor, a thin man with terrified eyes, looked to Lucian for guidance. Play, Victoria commanded. A waltz. Something dramatic. But before the conductor could raise his baton, a voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. Stop! Every head turned. Lucian Vale moved through the crowd with the kind of casual authority that made armed men step aside without thinking. He crossed the room in long, measured strides until he stood at the stage's edge, looking up at Elena with an expression she couldn't read. Victoria, he said, his voice low and controlled, this has gone far enough. For a moment, Elena thought she might be saved, that the notorious Lucian Vale, despite his reputation, might possess enough humanity to stop his sister's sadistic game. Then she saw his eyes. They weren't filled with mercy. They were calculating, measuring, assessing her like a piece of property whose value had suddenly become interesting. On the contrary, Lucian said slowly, never breaking eye contact with Elena, I think this evening just became far more entertaining. But let's make it interesting. He turned to face the crowd, and Elena saw why men feared him. Despite his youth, despite the expensive tailoring and refined appearance, there was something ancient and terrible in Lucian Vale's presence, something that understood violence on a molecular level. Our housemaid claims she can dance, Lucian announced. I propose we give her the opportunity to prove it, but with stakes worthy of this audience. What kind of stakes? Someone called from the crowd. Lucian's smile was thin and cold. Simple. She dances, a full waltz, no mistakes, no hesitation, and I grant her what she asked for earlier tonight when she tried to resign her position. Her freedom, papers, money, a new life. Elena's breath caught. She'd submitted her resignation letter 3 weeks ago, placed it on the household manager's desk with shaking hands. She'd saved every penny for 7 years. She'd planned her escape down to the bus ticket. The letter had disappeared without response. She'd thought it lost. Lucian had read it. However, Lucian continued, his voice dropping to a register that made the room lean closer, if she fails, if she stumbles, if she stops, if she shows anything less than perfection, he paused, letting the silence stretch. I put a bullet in her head right here on this stage. The ballroom erupted. Some people gasped, others laughed. A few even applauded the creativity of the wager. Elena just stood frozen, her ears ringing, her heart slamming against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. Lucian, darling, Victoria purred, you can't be serious. I'm always serious, Lucian replied. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun, sleek, black, expensive. He checked the chamber with practiced ease, then set it on the stage's edge within easy reach. Well? He looked up at Elena. Do you accept the terms? Every survival instinct Elena possessed screamed at her to refuse, to beg, to throw herself on his mercy and pray for a quick death instead of a prolonged one. But 7 years of invisible servitude had taught her something else. Lucian Vale didn't respect begging. He respected strength, control, the ability to stare into the abyss and not blink. Elena walked to the edge of the stage, her legs steadier than they had any right to be, and looked down at the man who held her life in his hands. I'll accept, she said clearly, on one condition. The crowd's murmur rose to a roar of disbelief. Victoria actually laughed out loud, but Lucian's expression didn't change. You're negotiating? You taught me, Elena replied. I've watched you for 7 years. You never accept a deal without leverage. Neither will I. Something flickered in those pale eyes. Amusement, respect, danger? Name your condition, Lucian said. Elena took a breath. When I succeed, not if, when you give me everything you promised, but you do it in front of everyone here. You write it out, you sign it, and you hand me the papers before I leave this room. No delays, no tricks, no accidents once I walk out that door. For 3 heartbeats, Lucian Vale stared at her in absolute silence. Then he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of the man who just discovered a new toy and couldn't wait to see if it would break. Done, he said. He turned to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an agreement. Conductor, you may begin when ready. The conductor's hand shook as he raised his baton. The orchestra members exchanged glances, uncertain whether they were about to accompany a performance or an execution. Elena didn't wait for them to decide. She reached down and slipped off her shoes, cheap black flats that would only slow her down, and stepped into the center of the stage in bare feet. The marble was cold. The lights were hot. 300 of the most powerful criminals in New York watched her with the focused attention of Romans waiting for lions to enter the Colosseum. And standing at the stage's edge, one hand resting casually near the loaded gun, Lucian Vale waited to see if she would dance or die. The first notes of the waltz filled the ballroom. Shostakovich, Elena recognized immediately. The second waltz. Dramatic. Melancholic. Perfect. Or perfectly cruel. She closed her eyes and let the music sink into her bones. Let it pull memories from places she'd locked away for 7 years. Before the mansion, before the invisibility, before survival became her only purpose. Before her mother died teaching her daughter the only legacy she could leave. Elena opened her eyes and began to dance. The first step was easy. The second, natural. By the third, muscle memory older than her servitude took over, and Elena Voss stopped being a housemaid and became what she'd been born to be, a dancer. Her body moved through the space with a precision that came from thousands of hours of training, from bleeding feet and aching muscles, from a childhood spent in studios while other children played. The waltz demanded grace, but Elena gave it more than that. She gave it emotion. Each turn was a year of silence, each extension a moment of stolen dignity. Each leap was freedom deferred, and every landing was survival. The crowd's laughter died first, then the whispers. Within 30 seconds, the ballroom fell into the kind of silence usually reserved for funeral services or confessionals. They'd expected a clumsy girl in a cheap dress stumbling through basic steps. Instead, they were watching something else entirely. Something that didn't belong in their world of blood money and moral bankruptcy. They were watching art. Elena lost herself in the movement. She forgot the gun, forgot Lucian's cold assessment, forgot Victoria's cruelty and the crowd's initial mockery. There was only the music and the space and the feeling of her body doing what it was designed to do. She danced the grief of her mother's death, the fear of her first night in the mansion, the shame of scrubbing blood from floors, the rage of 7 years spent invisible. And then, as the music began to build toward its conclusion, she danced something new. Hope, the possibility of freedom, the dream of a life beyond these walls, the wild, reckless belief that she might actually survive this night. Her final turn brought her face to face with Lucian Vale, and for the first time in 7 years, Elena met his eyes deliberately, held them, challenged them. She dropped into a deep curtsy as the final note faded, her chest heaving, her hair falling around her face in disarray, every muscle in her body screaming. Perfect. The silence stretched for 3 endless seconds. Then someone began to applaud. Within moments, the entire ballroom erupted. 300 people who trafficked in violence and fear gave a standing ovation to a housemaid in a thrift store dress who'd just danced for her life. Elena rose slowly, her legs shaking, her heart still racing. She looked at Lucian, at the gun still resting on the stage's edge, at his unreadable expression. "I kept my end," she said quietly. "Now keep yours." Lucian picked up the gun, and for one terrible moment, Elena thought he might shoot her anyway. That the applause had been a fever dream and she'd actually failed somehow. Instead, he tucked the weapon back into his jacket and pulled out a phone. "Marcus," he said into the receiver, never breaking eye contact with Elena. "Bring me the documents from my office, the ones I prepared this afternoon. Yes, all of them." He paused. "Now." 5 minutes later, a nervous man in an expensive suit appeared with a leather portfolio. Lucian took it, opened it on the stage's edge, and began pulling out papers. "Your freedom papers," he said, setting them down one by one. "Your new identification, 10,000 in cash. A letter of recommendation for employment." He looked up. "As agreed." Elena wanted to snatch the papers and run, but she forced herself to walk slowly to the stage's edge, to carefully review each document, to make sure they were real. They were. She picked them up with shaking hands, clutched them to her chest like a shield against the world. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Lucian replied quietly, so only she could hear. "You're not leaving this house tonight." Elena's blood turned to ice. "We had a deal, and I'm honoring it," Lucian interrupted. "Those papers are real. That money is yours. But it's past midnight, and I don't trust half the people in this room not to follow a young woman with 10,000 in cash onto the dark streets of Manhattan." His smile was thin. "Call it protective custody. You'll stay tonight as my guest, not my servant. In the morning, when the streets are safe and I can provide proper security, you're free to go wherever you want." It was logical. It even sounded almost kind. Elena didn't believe a word of it, but surrounded by 300 criminals holding papers that represented her only path to freedom, she had exactly zero leverage to argue. "One night," she said. "One night," Lucian agreed. Then louder, to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a performance. I think we can all agree that Ms. Voss has earned her freedom. Let's toast to hidden talents and unexpected entertainment." The crowd cheered, champagne flowed. The orchestra began playing something upbeat and mindless. And in the chaos of renewed celebration, Lucian Vale leaned close to Elena and whispered something that made her blood run cold. 7 years you've been invisible in my house. 7 years you've seen things, heard things, learned things. And in all that time, I never once questioned why a woman with your talents would accept a position scrubbing floors and serving drinks." His eyes were glacial. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to spend one night as my guest. We're going to have a conversation, and by morning, I'm going to know exactly who Elena Voss really is and why she's been hiding in my house." He straightened, his public smile returning. "Sleep well, Ms. Voss. Tomorrow, you're free. Tonight?" His smile sharpened. "Tonight, you belong to me." 2 security guards appeared at Elena's sides, not roughly, but firmly. They escorted her off the stage, through the partying crowd, past Victoria's glittering rage, and into the mansion's private quarters. The party continued behind them, but Elena barely heard it. Her mind raced, trying to figure out what Lucian suspected, what he knew, what he might discover. Because the truth was worse than anything he could imagine. Elena Voss wasn't just a housemaid. She wasn't even Elena Voss, not really. That was the name she'd borrowed from a dead woman's gravestone 7 years ago when she needed to disappear. Her real name was Elena Kozlov. And 28 years ago, before Lucian's grandfather murdered her family and stole everything they owned to build his criminal empire, the mansion they were standing in had belonged to her father. Elena wasn't a servant hiding in Lucian Vale's house. She was an heir standing in her own stolen home. And tomorrow, when Lucian discovered the truth, one of them wasn't going to survive it. The security guards deposited her in a guest suite on the mansion's third floor, a room she'd cleaned 100 times but never entered as anything other than staff. Thick carpets, silk curtains, a bed large enough to get lost in, a cage wrapped in luxury. Elena set her freedom papers on the dresser and walked to the window. Below, the party continued. Above, Manhattan's skyline glittered with the cold light of a city that devoured the weak and rewarded the ruthless. She'd survived 7 years by being invisible. Now, Lucian Vale had seen her. And in the morning, when he came for answers, Elena would have to decide, run with her freedom and abandon everything she'd worked toward, or stay and fight for the truth that had brought her here in the first place. Behind her, a soft knock at the door made her turn. Was? A woman's voice, elderly and kind. I've brought you some tea and a change of clothes. Mr. Vale thought you might want to rest. Elena opened the door to find the household manager, Mrs. Chen, who'd hired her 7 years ago, who'd taught her the mansion's routines, who'd never once treated her as less than human. Thank you, Elena said, taking the tray. Mrs. Chen hesitated, then lowered her voice. Whatever you told him, whatever you did, be careful, child. Lucian Vale is not a man who forgives surprises. She paused. And he's not a man who lets go of things that interest him. I'll remember, Elena promised. After Mrs. Chen left, Elena sat on the edge of the expensive bed, drinking tea that tasted like jasmine and regret, and tried to figure out how to survive the next 12 hours. Outside her door, she heard footsteps. Guards, probably, making sure their guest didn't try to leave. Elena looked at her freedom papers, at the $10,000 that represented 7 years of saved pennies and deferred dreams, at the identification card with a name that wasn't really hers. She'd come to this mansion with a plan: get inside, find evidence of what Lucian's grandfather had done, and expose the truth that would destroy the Vale Empire from within. 7 years, and she'd found nothing concrete enough to bring to authorities. Nothing that would survive the Vale family's lawyers and political connections. But she'd found something else. She'd found that Lucian Vale, despite his reputation, despite his violence, despite everything he represented, he valued honesty. Strength. The kind of courage it took to negotiate with a gun pointed at your head. It was a weakness she could exploit, or it was the one quality that might actually save her. Elena finished her tea, changed into the provided nightgown, and lay down on sheets that cost more than she'd earned in a month of service. Tomorrow, Lucian would come for answers. And Elena Kozlov, the invisible housemaid who'd spent 7 years preparing for this moment, would have to decide if she was brave enough to tell him the truth. That his empire was built on her family's bones. That his grandfather was a murderer and a thief. That everything Lucian Vale believed about his legacy was a lie. And that the woman he'd just set free was the only person alive who could prove it. Elena didn't sleep. She lay in the silk-sheeted bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, listening to the party below gradually fade into silence, waiting for the inevitable knock that would signal the end of whatever fragile peace this night had granted her. Around 3 in the morning, the last guests departed, their laughter and expensive cars fading into Manhattan's perpetual hum. The mansion settled into the kind of quiet that felt dangerous, the quiet before violence, before revelation, before everything changed. At 6:30, just as pale dawn light began filtering through the curtains, the knock came. Ms. Voss, Mrs. Chen's voice was soft but urgent. Mr. Vale requests your presence in the conservatory. Breakfast will be served. Requests. As if Elena had any choice, she dressed in the clothes that had been left for her, simple black pants and a white blouse. Nothing like the uniform she'd worn for 7 years, but nothing like freedom either. Her freedom papers sat on the dresser where she'd left them, and Elena hesitated before tucking them into her waistband. If this went badly, she wanted proof of their deal within reach. The conservatory occupied the mansion's eastern wing, a glass-walled room filled with exotic plants that cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. Elena had cleaned it weekly, carefully dusting leaves and checking soil moisture, always invisible, always efficient. Now she walked through its entrance as a guest, and the shift in perspective made her dizzy. Lucian sat at a small wrought iron table near the eastern windows, morning light cutting sharp angles across his face. He'd changed from last night's formal wear into dark pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, the kind of casual that still cost thousands but pretended not to care. A spread of breakfast foods covered the table: fresh fruit, pastries, coffee that smelled like it cost more per pound than Elena used to spend on groceries. Sit, he said, without looking up from the newspaper he was reading. Elena sat across from him, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Every instinct screamed at her to stay alert, stay ready, stay alive. Lucian set down the paper and studied her with those unsettling pale eyes. In daylight, they looked even more inhuman, ice blue with gray striations, the kind of eyes that saw too much and felt too little. Coffee? He asked. No, thank you. You should eat something. We're going to have a long conversation, and I prefer my guests don't faint from hunger. I'm not hungry. That wasn't a suggestion. Elena forced herself to take a croissant, to place it on her plate, to tear off a small piece even though her stomach was twisted too tight to accept food. Lucian poured himself coffee, black, no sugar, and leaned back in his chair. 7 years, he said quietly. You've worked in this house for 7 years. Started when you were 21, as I recall. Mrs. Chen hired you on the recommendation of a temp agency that no longer exists. Elena's blood chilled. He'd been checking her background. During those 7 years, Lucian continued, you've been the model employee. Never late, never sick, never complained, never stole, never asked questions. You cleaned my office weekly and never once looked at the papers on my desk. You served dinner to men discussing murders and acted deaf. You saw bodies removed from the basement and forgot them by morning. He paused. In fact, you were so unremarkable, so perfectly invisible, that until last night I couldn't have picked you out of a lineup. He leaned forward, and Elena saw the predator beneath the civilized veneer. So explain to me, Elena Voss, if that's even your real name, how a woman invisible enough to survive 7 years in my house is also trained well enough to dance like that. The question hung between them like a blade. Elena had prepared for this moment. She'd practiced lies in the mirror, constructed cover stories, built layers of deception to protect the truth. But looking into Lucian's eyes, she understood something critical. He would know if she lied. Men like Lucian Vale built empires on reading people, on detecting weakness, on smelling fear and deception. So she gave him something dangerous instead. Partial truth. My mother was a dancer, Elena said quietly. She trained at the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg. She was supposed to have a brilliant career. She paused, letting real grief color her words. She got pregnant instead. With me. Lucian's expression didn't change, but she saw his attention sharpen. She came to New York when I was 2 years old. My father was already dead. Heart attack, she said, though I never quite believed her. She worked whatever jobs she could find during the day and taught me to dance at night. Every night, from the time I could walk until the day she died, she taught me everything she knew. Why? Because it was the only legacy she had to give me. Because in her world, before she lost everything, dance meant something. Beauty, discipline, truth. Elena met his eyes. She wanted me to have at least one true thing in a world that had taken everything else from her. When did she die? 7 years ago. Cancer. Fast and brutal. She lasted 3 months after diagnosis. Elena's voice stayed steady despite the memories clawing at her throat. She died with nothing. No insurance, no savings, medical bills that buried me so deep I couldn't see daylight. So you took a job cleaning my house. I took a job that paid cash, asked few questions, and let me disappear. Elena paused. I needed to disappear. From what? This was the delicate part. The place where truth and fiction had to blend seamlessly enough to satisfy his curiosity without revealing everything. From people who thought I knew things about my mother's past. People who thought she'd told me secrets before she died. Elena forced her hands to stay still on the table. She didn't. Whatever my mother was running from, whatever she left behind in Russia, she never told me. But the people looking didn't believe that. What kind of people? The kind who don't ask politely. Lucien's eyes narrowed. Russians. Yes. He sat back, processing. Elena could see him fitting pieces together, constructing a narrative that made sense. A Russian immigrant dancer fleeing a dangerous past, a daughter left alone and vulnerable, a desperate need to vanish into the background of a world where people knew how to keep secrets. It was close enough to the truth to be believable, far enough from reality to protect her. You should have told me, Lucian said finally. Elena almost laughed. Told you what? That I was hiding from Russian criminals? That would have gotten me killed faster than stealing from your office. You don't harbor loose ends, Mr. Vale. You don't protect people who bring problems to your door. You don't know what I do. I've cleaned your house for 7 years. I know exactly what you do. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, and for a moment Elena thought she'd miscalculated. But instead of anger, she saw something else flicker across Lucian's face. Respect. Fair enough, he said quietly. He poured more coffee, and Elena noticed his hands, scarred knuckles, a thin white line across his left palm, hands that had built an empire and destroyed anyone who threatened it. The Russians who were looking for you, are they still a problem? I don't know. I've been invisible for 7 years. Either they gave up or they're still looking. Either way, after last night, I can't stay invisible anymore. No, Lucian agreed. You can't. The weight of that reality settled over Elena like a shroud. 300 people had watched her dance. 300 criminals with connections to every dark corner of the city. If anyone recognized her, if anyone connected Elena Voss to Elena Kozlov, if anyone realized what she was really doing in this house. You're afraid, Lucian observed. I'm practical. Last night you gave me freedom papers and $10,000. Today, I'm having breakfast with you instead of getting on a bus. That suggests freedom isn't quite as simple as you made it sound. It's not. Lucian set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Here's your situation, Elena. As of this morning, you're no longer invisible. Victoria knows your face. So do 300 other people, half of whom would kill you for entertainment if they thought it wouldn't inconvenience me. You can't go back to being a housemaid. You can't vanish again, not easily, not with your face fresh in everyone's memory. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you stay. Elena's heart stopped. Not as a servant, Lucian continued, as my guest, under my protection. In exchange, you help me with something I need. Which is? He stood, walking to the conservatory's eastern windows, looking out over the gardens that had once belonged to her family. Victoria is becoming a problem. Last night's little performance wasn't about entertainment. It was about power. She's testing boundaries, seeing how far she can push me, how much control she can seize while I'm distracted with business. You think she's planning a move against you? I know she is. He turned back to Elena. I need someone who can move through this house unseen, who knows its rhythms, who people have already forgotten exists. I need someone watching Victoria, reporting her meetings, tracking her allies. His pale eyes locked onto Elena's. I need the invisible housemaid back, but this time, working for me directly. It was almost perfect. Elena could stay in the house, could continue searching for the evidence she needed, could move freely under the protection of the man she was planning to destroy. Almost too perfect. Why me? She asked. You have security. You have people trained for this. Because Victoria knows my security. She's probably bought half of them. But you? Lucian's smile was thin. You spent 7 years being so unremarkable that even I didn't notice you. That's a talent worth exploiting. And if I refuse? Then I give you your freedom papers, your money, and my best wishes. You walk out that door, and whatever happens to you in the next 48 hours when Victoria's people start asking questions about the mysterious dancing housemaid who knows too much about this family's routines. He shrugged. That's not my problem anymore. Elena's hands clenched under the table. It wasn't a threat exactly. It was a statement of fact. The moment she walked out of this house, she became a liability that Victoria would eliminate without hesitation. How long? She asked. Until I've dealt with Victoria. A month. Maybe 2. And then I'm free? Actually free? No more conditions, no more deals? You have my word. Lucian Vale's word. Worth everything or nothing, depending on which stories you believed. Elena stood, walking to the windows, looking out at the gardens that had once been her playground before they became her prison. She could feel Lucian watching her, measuring her response, calculating whether she'd accept or run. The smart move was to refuse, to take the money and disappear, to abandon 7 years of planning and start over somewhere new. But Elena hadn't spent 7 years cleaning floors to walk away now. I'll need access, she said quietly, to the whole house. No restrictions. If I'm watching Victoria, I need to move freely. Done. And information. If you want accurate reports, I need to know what I'm looking for, who her allies are, what business interests might motivate her. I'll provide what I can. One more thing. Elena turned to face him. When this is over, when you've dealt with Victoria and I've helped you, I want answers about this house, about your grandfather, about how this empire was really built. Lucian's expression went very still. Why? Because in 7 years of cleaning your house, I found things. Old documents, photographs, letters. Nothing concrete enough to matter, but enough to make me curious. Enough to make me wonder if the Vale Empire's official history is as clean as it claims. It was a calculated risk, showing this much curiosity. But if Lucian thought she was motivated by simple inquisitiveness rather than personal vendetta, he might let his guard down. Everyone has secrets, Lucian said carefully. Mine more than most. What makes you think I'd share them? Because you're not stupid. You know that anyone paying attention can see the cracks in your family's story. Better to control the narrative by sharing it with someone who's already proven she can keep secrets. Elena paused. I've spent 7 years knowing things that could have gotten me killed. I never told anyone. That's worth something. For a long moment, Lucian studied her in silence. Then, slowly, he smiled. You're not what I expected, Elena Voss. Neither are you, Mr. Vale. If we're going to work together, you should call me Lucian. I'll stick with Mr. Vale. It reminds us both what this relationship actually is. His smile widened. Smart. Mrs. Chen will move your things to a proper guest suite on the second floor. You'll have complete access to the house except my private office and the basement levels. If Victoria or anyone else questions your presence, you're my personal assistant. You're researching family history for a project I'm developing. What kind of project? I'll think of something convincing. In the meantime, I need you to start immediately. Victoria has a meeting this afternoon with someone I don't recognize. I want to know who they are and what they're discussing. Where's the meeting? The West Library, 3 o'clock. She thinks I'm in the city all day. Lucian pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. I'm sending you a secure number. Anything you discover, you report directly to me. No one else. Understood? Elena's phone buzzed with the incoming message. Understood. Good. Now finish your breakfast. You're going to need your strength. He left her alone in the conservatory with coffee going cold and pastries she couldn't eat, her mind already racing through the implications of what she'd just agreed to. She'd bought herself more time in the house, more access to search for evidence, more opportunity to find the proof that would destroy Lucian's empire from within. But she'd also put herself directly in his line of sight. No more invisibility, no more safety in obscurity. Elena looked down at her hands, dancer's hands, her mother used to call them, long-fingered and elegant despite years of scrubbing floors. They were shaking. She forced them still and went to prepare for her new role. The second-floor guest suite Mrs. Chen had prepared was larger than the apartment Elena had shared with her mother. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the eastern gardens, a king-size bed with silk sheets, an attached bathroom with marble everything, a walk-in closet that Mrs. Chen was already filling with clothes. Mr. Vale sent these, the older woman explained, hanging up dresses and blouses. He said your wardrobe should match your new position. Elena recognized the labels. Designers she'd only seen in magazines. Each piece probably cost more than she'd made in a month of service. Mrs. Chen, Elena said quietly, did you know? When you hired me 7 years ago, did you know I was lying? The older woman paused, a silk blouse in her hands, and turned to face Elena with an expression of infinite weariness. Child, everyone in this house is lying about something. I stopped asking questions a long time ago. She folded the blouse carefully. But I will tell you this. In 30 years of working for the Vale family, I've seen a lot of people try to use them, manipulate them, or destroy them. I've never seen any of them survive it. Is that a warning? It's a fact. Whatever you're really doing here, whatever you think you're going to accomplish, Mrs. Chen met Elena's eyes with surprising strength. Make sure it's worth dying for, because that's how this story ends for most people foolish enough to play games with Lucian Vale. She finished hanging the clothes and left Elena alone with expensive fabric and dire warnings. At 2:45, Elena positioned herself in a rarely used parlor adjacent to the West Library. The room's connecting door had been locked for years, but the original house had been built with servants' passages, narrow corridors hidden behind walls that let staff move unseen through the mansion. Elena had discovered them in her first month of service. She'd used them occasionally to avoid Victoria or drunk guests. Now, she used one to slip into the wall space behind the library, where gaps in the old woodwork let sound travel. At precisely 3 o'clock, Victoria's voice echoed through the library. Thank you for coming. I know the short notice was inconvenient. A man's voice responded, accented and careful. For the right price, Miss Vale. I'm always available. Elena pressed her eye to a crack in the woodwork. Through the narrow gap, she could see Victoria sitting in a leather chair near the fireplace, her blonde hair perfect, her expression calculating. Across from her sat a man Elena didn't recognize, mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of nondescript face that disappeared in crowds. Professional. Dangerous. I need information, Victoria said. About a woman named Elena Voss. Everything you can find, where she came from, who she really is, why my brother is suddenly so interested in keeping her close. Elena's heart stopped. I assume this is more than simple jealousy? The man asked. My brother doesn't do anything without reason. He doesn't keep people around unless they're useful. A housemaid who can dance like that, who negotiates with a gun to her head, who survived 7 years in this house without anyone noticing. Victoria's voice hardened. She's not what she appears to be. I want to know what she's hiding. That will take time. If she's using a false identity, then find the real one. I don't care what it costs or how long it takes. I want everything about Elena Voss and whoever she was before she became Elena Voss. Victoria stood, walking to the window. And I want to know if my brother is aware of whatever secret she's keeping. You think she's manipulating him? I think she's survived 7 years by being invisible, and now she's suddenly center stage. People don't change that dramatically without reason. Either she's planning something or someone's using her to get to Lucian. Victoria turned back to the investigator. Either way, I want to know before she becomes a bigger problem. I'll begin immediately. My usual fee, double it. I want results fast. The investigator smiled. In that case, Miss Vale, consider it done. They discussed logistics, payment methods, and timelines while Elena's mind raced. Victoria had hired a professional investigator, someone who specialized in uncovering false identities, someone who would eventually trace Elena Voss back to a gravestone and then start looking for the real person using that name, someone who would eventually discover Elena Kozlov. Elena slipped back through the servants' passage, her heart pounding, her breath coming too fast. She made it to her new suite and locked the door before pulling out her phone with shaking hands. She typed a message to Lucian's secure number. Victoria hired an investigator, looking into my background. Meeting just concluded, West Library. The response came within seconds. Name? Elena closed her eyes, pulling up the memory of the man's face. Mid-50s, gray hair, accent possibly Eastern European. She called him by first name, Dmitri. 3 dots appeared, indicating Lucian was typing. Then, I know him. Don't worry. I'll handle it. Don't worry. As if Elena could stop the spiral of panic threatening to consume her. She'd known this was a risk, known that stepping into visibility would eventually lead to scrutiny. But she'd expected more time, weeks at least, enough time to find what she needed and plan her next move. Instead, Victoria had hired someone within hours of the party. Elena paced her suite, trying to think through her options. She could run now, take the freedom papers and money, and disappear before the investigator discovered anything. But running meant abandoning 7 years of work, admitting defeat, letting her mother's murder go unavenged. Or she could stay and fight, could trust that Lucian would protect his investment, could use this new visibility to push harder, search faster, find the evidence before Victoria's investigator found the truth. A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. It's Lucian. Open the door. Elena hesitated, then unlocked it. Lucian stood in the hallway looking like controlled fury, his expression calm, his eyes ice, his entire body radiating the kind of danger that made smart people run. We need to talk, he said, walking past her into the suite without invitation. About Dmitri Volkov and why Victoria hiring him is worse than you realize. He closed the door and turned to face her. Volkov specializes in finding people who don't want to be found. He's worked for intelligence agencies, criminal organizations, and anyone else willing to pay his fees. He's very, very good at what he does. Lucian's voice stayed level. Which means if there's anything in your past, anything at all, that contradicts the story you told me this morning, now would be the time to share it. Elena's mouth went dry. Because if Volkov discovers you've been lying to me, Lucian continued quietly, and Victoria brings me that information before I know the truth myself. He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. He would kill her himself. Elena stood at a crossroads. Tell Lucian the truth now and risk everything, or maintain the lie and hope she could find her evidence before Volkov uncovered her real identity. But looking into Lucian's eyes, she understood something critical. This wasn't a man who tolerated deception. This wasn't someone she could manipulate or fool. If she wanted any chance of survival, she needed to give him truth. Not all of it, but enough. "My name is Elena Kozlov," she said quietly. "My mother was Elena Voss. That part was true. But my father wasn't some random Russian who died of a heart attack." Lucian went very still. "His name was Alexei Kozlov. He owned this house before your grandfather bought it 28 years ago. Or rather," Elena met his eyes, "before your grandfather murdered my father and stole it." The silence that followed was so complete Elena could hear her own heartbeat. Then Lucian spoke, his voice deadly calm. "Explain, now, everything." Elena had imagined this moment 1,000 times. In every version, she'd been armed with evidence, backed by lawyers, protected by distance and preparation. She'd never once imagined standing alone in a locked room with Lucian Vale while confessing that his entire legacy was built on her family's murder. But there was no going back now. "My father came to New York in 1995, Elena began, her voice steadier than she felt. "He was a Russian oligarch who saw the Soviet collapse coming and got out early with his fortune intact. Smart money, legitimate businesses, no ties to organized crime. He bought this mansion, established import companies, invested in real estate." She paused. "He was building something clean." Lucian hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. He stood between Elena and the door like a statue carved from ice and rage. "In 1998, your grandfather approached my father with a business proposition, a partnership. Your grandfather had connections my father needed, political access, union cooperation, dock space for shipping. In exchange, my father had capital and legitimacy. On paper, it was perfect." "On paper," Lucian repeated quietly. "My father didn't know your grandfather was already building a criminal empire, didn't know the partnerships were fronts for money laundering, that the shipping containers held more than imported goods, that every legitimate business was covering 3 illegal ones." Elena's hands clenched. By the time he discovered the truth, he was already implicated. Your grandfather had made sure of that. She walked to the window, unable to look at Lucian while she continued. "My father tried to extricate himself. Tried to dissolve the partnership, buy out your grandfather's interest, sever all ties. Your grandfather refused, said they were bound together now, that my father's name was on documents that would send him to prison if exposed. He demanded this house as collateral for my father's silence. And your father refused. My father threatened to go to the authorities, to expose everything, even if it meant destroying himself in the process." Elena's voice cracked. 3 days later, he was dead, officially ruled a heart attack. He was 42 years old, perfectly healthy, and he died in his study in this house while my mother and I were sleeping upstairs. The silence stretched like broken glass. "My mother knew," Elena continued. "She knew it wasn't natural. She tried to gather evidence, tried to find proof, but your grandfather's people were thorough. Within a month, she was forced to sign papers transferring the house and all my father's assets to your grandfather. She was told if she fought it, if she spoke to anyone, if she ever came back to New York." Elena's throat closed. "They showed her pictures of me, 6 years old, playing in the garden. The message was clear. So she ran. She took me to a small town in Pennsylvania, changed our names, and spent the rest of her life making sure I never asked questions about my father. She worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. She danced in her spare time because it was the only thing she had left that they couldn't take from her." Elena turned to face Lucian. "And she taught me everything she knew because she wanted me to have one piece of the life I should have had." Lucian's expression was unreadable. "When did you learn the truth?" "The week before she died. The cancer had spread to her brain, and she knew she didn't have long. She told me everything. About my father, about this house, about your grandfather, and what he'd done." Elena's voice hardened. "She made me promise not to seek revenge. Made me swear I'd let it go, live my life, forget the Kozlov name ever existed. But you didn't. I tried. For 3 months after she died, I tried to move on. I paid her medical bills, sold everything we owned, tried to start over." Elena met his eyes. "But everywhere I looked, I saw your family's name. Vale Industries, Vale Foundation, Vale fucking everything. Your grandfather had died by then, but the empire he built on my father's murder was thriving, and everyone talked about what a great man he was. What a legacy he'd left." Her voice shook with barely controlled fury. "So I created Elena Voss. I used my mother's maiden name, forged references from the temp agency, and I applied to work in the house that should have been mine. I told myself I just wanted to see it, to walk through the rooms where my father died, to understand what they'd built on his grave. She paused. But once I was inside, once I started seeing the truth of what this empire really was, I couldn't leave. Not without proof. Not without some way to make them answer for what they'd done. 7 years, Lucian said quietly. You've been searching for evidence for 7 years. Yes. Did you find any? Elena's laugh was bitter. Nothing concrete. Old photographs I couldn't authenticate. Documents that proved business relationships but not murder. Shipping manifests that suggested illegal activity but couldn't be traced back to specific crimes. Your grandfather was meticulous. He built this empire to survive scrutiny. And me? Lucian's voice was dangerously soft. What was your plan for me? This was the moment that would determine if she lived or died. At first you were just another Vale, another beneficiary of my father's murder. I hated you on principle. Elena forced herself to hold his gaze. But after 7 years of watching you, of seeing how you operate, how you think, I realized something. You're not your grandfather. That's not an answer. You're ruthless, yes, violent when necessary. You've done terrible things to maintain this empire. Elena's voice steadied. But you have rules, lines you don't cross. I've seen you refuse deals that would have made millions because they involve trafficking. I've watched you destroy competitors but spare their families. You're a criminal, Mr. Vale, but you're not a monster. Your point? My point is that your grandfather was a monster, and I don't think you know the full extent of what he did to build what you've inherited. Elena took a breath. I think if you knew the truth, the real truth about where this empire came from, you might actually care. Lucian stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Marcus, I need you to pull files from the archive. Everything from 1995 to 1998. Specifically, anything related to property acquisitions and business partnerships with Russian nationals. He paused. I don't care if it's stored off-site. I want it here in 2 hours. He hung up and looked at Elena. You're going to show me exactly what you found. Every photograph, every document, every piece of circumstantial evidence you've been hoarding. And then we're going to find out if your story holds up or if you've been lying to me for 7 years. And if it holds up, then we have a bigger problem than Victoria hiring an investigator. Lucian's expression was carved from stone. If my grandfather murdered your father and stole his fortune, then everything I've built, everything this family claims as legacy, it's founded on lies and blood. Would that matter to you? The question hung between them like a challenge. It would matter, Lucian said quietly, because I've spent 15 years cleaning up my grandfather's mistakes. Transitioning illegal operations into legitimate businesses, removing the worst elements from our organization, building something that might actually last without constant bloodshed. His pale eyes met hers. If you're telling me that the foundation itself is rotten, that the original fortune was stolen, then everything I've built is still poisoned at the root. Elena hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected him to care about legitimacy or legacy beyond maintaining power. Why? She asked. Why does it matter where it came from if it's yours now? Lucian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight Elena hadn't heard before. Because my father died trying to legitimize this empire. He spent his entire life attempting to transform what his father built into something defensible, something he could be proud of, and the effort killed him. Lucian's jaw tightened. I was 12 when I watched him die. Heart attack, the doctors said, stress and overwork. But I always wondered if it was something else. If my grandfather... He stopped. Elena's heart stuttered. You think your grandfather killed your father too? I think my grandfather was capable of anything to protect his empire, including murdering his own son if that son threatened to expose too much truth. Lucian's voice was flat, emotionless, but Elena heard the buried rage underneath. So yes, Ms. Kozlov, it matters to me where this fortune came from, because if you're right about your father, you might be right about mine. The shared grief between them was unexpected and unwelcome. Elena had spent 7 years hating the Vale family as a monolithic evil. She hadn't considered that Lucian might also be a victim of his grandfather's ambition. Before either could speak again, Elena's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. The housemaid wasn't as invisible as she thought. I know what you're looking for. 4th floor, eastern storage room, behind the false wall. You have 1 hour before I tell Victoria. Prove you deserve those secrets. Elena showed Lucian the message, her hands shaking. "Who sent this?" he demanded. "I don't know, but they know I've been searching. They know about the storage room." Elena looked up at him. "Did you know there was a false wall on the fourth floor?" "No." Lucian was already moving toward the door. "But we're going to find out what's behind it." They took the servants' stairs to avoid Victoria's people, moving quickly through the mansion's forgotten spaces. The fourth floor had been servants' quarters once, before the staff was reduced and consolidated. Now it was mostly storage, old furniture, archived files, the detritus of a family too wealthy to throw anything away. The eastern storage room was locked, but Lucian had keys to every door in the house. Inside, boxes were stacked floor to ceiling, covered in dust thick enough to write in. "Where?" Lucian asked. Elena studied the room, looking for inconsistencies. "There." The eastern wall was 6 inches shallower than it should be based on the room's exterior dimensions. She began pulling boxes away from the wall, Lucian helping despite his expensive clothes. Within minutes, they'd cleared enough space to reveal the wall's edge, and Elena saw it, a seam in the wood paneling, barely visible, that suggested a door. Lucian found the mechanism, a small depression that, when pressed, caused a section of wall to swing inward on hidden hinges. Behind it was a small room, maybe 6 feet by 8, completely empty except for a single metal filing cabinet. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to hide this," Lucian observed. Elena approached the cabinet with shaking hands. It wasn't locked. The drawer slid open smoothly, revealing files organized with meticulous care. The first folder she pulled out was labeled Kozlov Partnership 1995 to 1998. Inside were contracts, financial statements, business proposals, everything documenting the partnership between Alexei Kozlov and Lucian's grandfather. But that wasn't what made Elena's breath catch. Underneath the legitimate documents were others, handwritten notes detailing how to implicate Kozlov in illegal activities, forged customs documents showing Kozlov signing off on smuggled goods, bank transfers made to look like Kozlov was laundering money. "He was framing your father," Lucian said quietly, reading over Elena's shoulder, "building a case against him before your father even knew there was a problem." "Insurance," Elena whispered. "So if my father tried to expose him, my grandfather could claim my father was the real criminal." The next folder was worse. It was labeled Kozlov Termination and contained medical records, correspondence with a doctor whose name Elena didn't recognize, and a receipt for something called Compound 47, tasteless, undetectable cardiac event within 72 hours. Poison. Documentary proof that Alexei Kozlov had been murdered. Elena's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the file. Lucian took it from her gently, his face carved from ice as he read through the documents. "This would have been enough," he said finally. "If your mother had found this, if she'd gone to the authorities with this evidence, she would have proven my father was murdered, and your grandfather would have gone to prison." Elena's voice broke. She didn't know. She thought there was no proof. She ran because she thought fighting was hopeless. The third folder made Elena's blood turn to ice. It was labeled Insurance Final Protocol and contained a single document dated 6 months after her father's death. It was an order written in Lucian's grandfather's hand, detailing arrangements for permanent removal of loose end E. Kozlov, daughter, if necessary. A kill order for a 6-year-old child. "He was going to murder me," Elena whispered. "If my mother hadn't disappeared, if she'd caused any problems." Lucian's hands clenched on the folder hard enough to crumple the edges. "This is why she ran. This is why she spent 20 years hiding." Elena pulled out the last folder with numb fingers. This one was labeled Vale Succession Concerns and dated from 8 years ago, the year Lucian's father had died. Inside were more notes in that same meticulous handwriting, details about how Lucian's father was becoming a liability, how his efforts to legitimize the business were threatening operational security, how permanent solution may become necessary to protect legacy. And at the bottom, another receipt, another doctor, another compound. Lucian went very, very still. "He killed my father," he said, his voice empty of emotion. "My own grandfather murdered my father because he was trying to make the business legitimate." Elena watched something fundamental break behind Lucian's eyes. He'd suspected, maybe even believed on some level, but suspicion wasn't the same as proof, wasn't the same as holding evidence of your grandfather's ultimate betrayal in your hands. "I'm sorry," Elena said quietly, and meant it. Lucian's laugh was harsh and broken. You're sorry? Your father was murdered. Your childhood was stolen. You've spent 7 years living in the house where it happened, searching for this evidence, and you're apologizing to me? Because I know what this feels like. Learning that the foundation of your entire life is built on murder and lies. Elena's throat closed. I know how much it hurts. They stood in the hidden room, surrounded by proof of their grandfather's sins, two people who should have been enemies, united by shared grief and stolen legacies. Then Lucien's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 10 seconds, and his expression went from grief to rage so fast Elena stepped back. When? He demanded. How many? A pause. Lock down the house. No one in or out. Find Victoria and bring her to my office. Now. He hung up and looked at Elena with eyes like winter storms. Victoria's made her move. She's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. She's planning to present evidence that I've been compromised, that I'm keeping a Russian agent in the house, that I'm unfit to lead the family. His voice was deadly calm. She's going to try to take control of the empire. How does she even know? Someone told her. Someone who knew you were here, knew your background, knew enough to make you sound like a threat. Lucian's jaw clenched. Someone who's been feeding her information all along. Elena's mind raced. The text message. Whoever sent it knew about this room, knew what we'd find. They wanted us to discover this evidence at the exact moment Victoria was making her move. Which means they've been playing both sides, helping you search while reporting to Victoria, keeping us both in play until they were ready to make their move. Lucian pulled out his phone, scrolling through security feeds. Mrs. Chen, she's been here longer than anyone. She has access to everything, and she's the only one who could have known about this hidden room. No, Elena said immediately. Mrs. Chen warned me about you, told me to be careful. If she was working for Victoria, then warning you makes perfect sense. It builds trust, makes you confide in her, lets her gather information while appearing to be on your side. Lucian's voice was cold. It's exactly what I would do. Before Elena could respond, the door to the storage room burst open. Victoria stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 armed men, her expression triumphant. Well, well, she purred. Isn't this cozy? My dear brother hiding in storage rooms with the Russian spy who's been living under our roof for 7 years. The board is going to love this. Lucian moved in front of Elena instinctively. Victoria, you're making a mistake. The only mistake was letting you run this family for so long. You've gone soft, Lucian. Keeping enemies close, trying to legitimize businesses that should stay in the shadows, weakening our position with your moral crusade. Victoria's smile was razor sharp. The board agrees with me. Tomorrow morning, they're voting to remove you as head of the family and install me instead. On what grounds? Compromised judgment, harboring a known threat, risking family security for personal interest. Victoria gestured to Elena. She's been lying to you from the beginning. Her real name is Elena Kozlov. Her father tried to steal from our grandfather 28 years ago and died for his trouble. She's been in this house for 7 years searching for evidence to destroy us. I know who she is, Lucian said calmly. I've known since this morning. Victoria's smile faltered. You... what? I know exactly who Elena Kozlov is. I know why she's here. And I know what she's been searching for. Lucian's voice was ice. I also know that everything you just said about her father is a lie. He held up the folders from the hidden room. This is what Elena found. Proof that our grandfather murdered Alexei Kozlov and stole his fortune to build this empire. Proof that he framed an innocent man and poisoned him when he threatened to expose the truth. Lucian's eyes locked onto Victoria's, and proof that he murdered our father 8 years ago when he tried to legitimize the business. The color drained from Victoria's face. You're lying. Read them yourself. Lucian threw the folders at her feet. Every document is there, every receipt, every forged paper, every kill order. Our entire legacy is built on murder and theft. Victoria stared at the folders like they were venomous snakes. Her armed men shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether they were protecting her or helping cover up crimes. This doesn't change anything, Victoria said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Even if it's true, even if grandfather did those things, the empire exists now. We can't give it back. We can't undo what's done. No, Lucian agreed. But we can choose what we do next. We can acknowledge the truth and try to make amends, or we can keep building on a foundation of lies and murder until it eventually collapses and buries us all. You want to make amends? Victoria's laugh was shrill. To who? Her. She pointed at Elena. You want to give her back a fortune that's been ours for 3 decades? Hand over the empire grandfather built just because she has some old documents? I want, Lucian said carefully, to understand the full extent of what grandfather did. I want to know how deep the corruption goes. And I want to make sure that whatever we build going forward isn't poisoned by his sins. You've lost your mind. Victoria looked at her men. Take them both. Lock them in the basement until the board meeting. If Lucian won't see reason, the board will make the decision for him. The armed men raised their weapons, but before they could move, a voice from the doorway stopped everyone cold. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mrs. The. Chen stood in the doorway holding a phone, her elderly face set in grim determination. This conversation has been recorded and transmitted to a very specific list of people. Federal prosecutors, investigative journalists, and several board members who weren't informed about Victoria's little coup attempt. She looked at Victoria with disappointment. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when you started plotting against your own brother? Victoria's face twisted with rage. You're fired, old woman, and when I'm running this family, you won't be running anything, Mrs. Chen interrupted, because in approximately 5 minutes, federal agents are going to arrive with warrants based on the evidence that's been building against this family for years. Evidence I've been quietly collecting and providing to authorities while waiting for the right moment to bring it all down. The room erupted into chaos. Victoria screamed orders at her men. Lucian moved to shield Elena. The armed guards looked at each other uncertainly, caught between conflicting loyalties. And Elena, standing in the center of 7 years of lies finally unraveling, understood something crucial. Mrs. Chen wasn't working for Victoria or Lucian or Elena. She was working for justice. And she'd been using all of them to gather enough evidence to destroy the Vale Empire from within. The sound of sirens filled the air outside. Federal agents were coming. The empire that had murdered Elena's father and stolen her legacy was about to face consequences decades overdue. But as Elena looked at Lucian's face, grief and rage and betrayal warring for dominance, she realized something that changed everything. She didn't want revenge anymore. She wanted truth. And maybe, if there was any justice left in the world, she wanted the chance to build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The sirens grew louder, and Elena made a decision that would determine all their futures. Mrs. Chen, she said clearly, her voice cutting through the chaos. Before the agents arrive, there's something you need to know. Everyone in the room turned to stare at Elena. The sirens were seconds away, but she had to say this now before federal agents flooded the mansion and swept everyone into separate interrogation rooms where the truth would be filtered through lawyers and prosecutors with their own agendas. Not everything in those folders tells the whole story, Elena said, looking directly at Mrs. Chen. And if you turn over that evidence without context, you're going to destroy innocent people along with the guilty ones. Mrs. Chen's expression was unreadable. I've been collecting evidence for 12 years, child. I know exactly what I'm doing. Do you? Elena challenged, because those documents prove Lucian's grandfather was a murderer and a thief. But they don't prove Lucian knew anything about it. They don't show that he spent 15 years trying to legitimize businesses his grandfather corrupted. They don't demonstrate that he's actively worked to remove the worst elements from this organization. Elena, what are you doing? Lucian's voice was low, confused. Telling the truth. Elena turned to face him. You asked me this morning what my plan was for you. The honest answer? I didn't have one. I came here planning to destroy the Vale Empire without caring who else got caught in the blast. But I've watched you for 7 years, and I've seen things the evidence won't show. She looked back at Mrs. Chen, aware that Victoria's armed guards were still pointing weapons at various people, that the sirens were getting impossibly close, that she had maybe 60 seconds before this opportunity disappeared forever. I've seen Lucian refuse shipments that involved human trafficking, even though they would have made millions. I've watched him shut down protection rackets that targeted immigrant businesses. I've seen him fire men for excessive violence and pay settlements to families his grandfather's people destroyed. Elena's voice strengthened. He's not innocent, but he's also not his grandfather. And if you hand over that evidence without making that distinction clear, you're not serving justice. You're just replacing one injustice with another. She's lying, Victoria spat. She's trying to protect him because he's manipulated her. I'm trying, Elena interrupted coldly, to make sure that when this empire falls, the right people pay for the right crimes. Your grandfather murdered my father. That's a fact. But Lucian wasn't even born yet. You want to punish him for that? Fine. But do it with the truth, not with evidence that makes him look complicit in crimes he didn't commit. The sound of car doors slamming echoed from outside. Federal agents were in the driveway. Mrs. Chen's phone buzzed with an incoming call that she ignored. "Why are you protecting him?" Mrs. Chen asked quietly. "After everything his family took from you?" Elena met Lucian's eyes across the room, seeing shock and something else, something that looked almost like gratitude. "Because my mother spent 20 years running from the truth. She died believing that fighting was hopeless, that justice was impossible, that the Veil Empire was untouchable." Elena's voice cracked. "I don't want to prove her right by burning everything down without caring who deserves to burn and who doesn't." Heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs, male voices calling out federal agent identifications. They were out of time. Mrs. Chen looked at Elena for a long moment, then at Lucian, then at the folders scattered on the floor. "I've worked in this house for 30 years, she said softly. "I've seen 3 generations of Veils. I watched Lucian's grandfather build an empire on blood. I watched his father try to redeem it and die in the attempt. And I've watched Lucian struggle with a legacy he never asked for and doesn't fully understand." She paused. "You're right, the evidence doesn't tell the whole story, but neither does protecting him from consequences." "I'm not asking you to protect him," Elena said. "I'm asking you to be precise about what he's guilty of. Let the law decide if leading a criminal enterprise is enough to convict him. But don't let them think he murdered my father or his own. Don't let the prosecutors lump him in with his grandfather's sins just because it makes their case easier." Federal agents burst through the door, weapons drawn, voices overlapping in a chaos of commands. "Everyone raise your hands. Nobody move. This is a federal operation." In the confusion, Lucian moved close enough to Elena to whisper, "Why?" She didn't have a good answer. Didn't know if it was because somewhere in 7 years of watching him, she'd started to believe he deserved a chance at redemption, or if it was because she recognized in him the same thing she saw in herself, someone trying to escape the gravity of sins they inherited but didn't commit. "Because someone should know the difference between justice and revenge," she whispered back. "And I'm tired of letting my father's murder define every choice I make." Then the agent separated them, and the next 6 hours dissolved into a blur of interrogation rooms, lawyers appearing from nowhere, questions asked and re-asked until Elena's voice went hoarse from repetition. She told them everything. About her real identity, about her father's murder, about the evidence in the hidden room. She gave them dates and names and details that she'd memorized over 7 years of invisible servitude. She watched federal prosecutors' eyes light up as they realized the scope of what she was handing them, a criminal empire's entire foundation laid bare, documented, provable. But she also made the distinction clear. She separated what Lucian's grandfather had done from what Lucian had inherited. She detailed the legitimate businesses, the terminated criminal operations, the gradual transition away from the worst excesses of the original empire. "So you're saying Lucian Vale is innocent?" the lead prosecutor asked, his skepticism obvious. "I'm saying he's guilty of running a criminal organization that still has illegal operations. But he didn't murder anyone. He didn't steal my father's fortune. And he's been actively working to legitimize what he inherited, even if that work is incomplete." Elena met the prosecutor's eyes. "Charge him with what he's actually done. Don't make him answer for his grandfather's murders just because it's convenient." The prosecutor wasn't happy, but he noted her distinction. In a different room, Victoria was apparently singing like a canary, offering up every illegal operation she could remember in exchange for immunity. Mrs. Chen was providing documentation that corroborated everything Elena had said and more. Years of careful record-keeping, copies of financial documents, testimony about operations she'd witnessed. The Veil Empire was imploding in real time. Around midnight, an exhausted lawyer informed Elena that she was free to go. No charges would be filed against her. She was a witness, a victim, and potentially an heir to assets that had been illegally seized. The legal battles over the estate would take years, but she had a legitimate claim. "What about Lucian?" Elena asked. The lawyer's expression was carefully neutral. "Mr. Vale has been arrested and charged with multiple counts of racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. He'll be arraigned tomorrow morning. Bail will likely be denied given flight risk and the severity of charges." Elena's stomach dropped. "Can I see him?" "That's not advisable. You're a witness in the case against him. Any contact could be seen as attempting to influence testimony or coordinate stories." "I don't care about advisable. Can I see him? Yes or no?" The lawyer sighed. 5 minutes. That's all I can arrange. They put her in a conference room at the federal building and left her alone with her thoughts. Elena stared at her reflection in the mirrored glass, wondering if there were agents behind it watching, wondering what they saw when they looked at her. Victim? Conspirator? The woman who'd brought down one of New York's most powerful crime families, or the daughter still seeking revenge for a father she barely remembered? The door opened. Lucian entered, flanked by two federal marshals, his hands cuffed in front of him, still wearing the clothes from this morning that were now rumpled and stained with dust from the storage room. He looked exhausted, hollowed out, like someone who'd lost everything and was still processing the scope of the disaster. The marshals positioned themselves by the door but didn't leave. 5 minutes, one of them reminded them. Lucian sat down across from Elena and studied her with those pale eyes that had terrified her once, and now just looked tired. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally. "Distinguish between me and my grandfather. You could have let them lump us together. Would have been easier." "Easier isn't the same as right." "Right." His laugh was bitter. "I've been running a criminal empire for 15 years, Elena. I've ordered violence, sanctioned theft, corrupted officials. The fact that I didn't personally murder anyone doesn't make me a good person." "I know, but it makes you different from the person who murdered my father. That distinction matters to me." Lucian leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "What happens now? For you, I mean. After all this?" Elena hadn't let herself think about it, hadn't looked beyond the immediate crisis of federal agents and collapsing empires. "I don't know. The lawyers say I have a claim to my father's estate, but that'll take years to resolve. In the meantime, I'm unemployed, homeless, and the only skills on my resume are cleaning bloodstains and pretending not to exist." She paused. "But I'm free. Actually free. For the first time since my mother ran away with me 28 years ago." "The house," Lucian said suddenly. "The mansion. If your claim is legitimate, if the lawyers can prove it was illegally seized, it should go back to you, or at least you should receive fair compensation for its value." "I don't want it." The words surprised Elena even as she said them. "That house has been a prison for everyone who lived in it. Your grandfather imprisoned my family with murder and theft. Then he imprisoned your father with expectations and corruption. Then you with a legacy you never chose. And me with an obsession I couldn't escape." She shook her head. "If I ever get legal control, I'll sell it. Use the money for something that actually helps people instead of just trading one form of captivity for another." Something shifted in Lucian's expression. "You really don't want revenge." "I wanted the truth. I got it. Everything else is just noise." Elena paused. "What about you? What happens to you?" "Best case scenario? I take a plea deal. Provide testimony against everyone else involved in the organization. Give the prosecutors everything they need to dismantle what's left of the empire. In exchange, maybe I get 20 years instead of life." His smile was thin. "Worst case? Life in federal prison, watching my family's legacy become a cautionary tale in law school textbooks." "Victoria? Already negotiating immunity in exchange for testimony. She'll walk away from this untouched, which tells you everything you need to know about how justice actually works." Bitterness colored his voice. "She spent years undermining me, building her own power base, planning a coup, and she'll face no consequences because she's willing to say the right things to the right prosecutors." One of the marshals cleared his throat. 3 minutes left. "There's something else," Lucian said, his voice dropping lower. "Something I need to tell you before you disappear and I spend the rest of my life in prison." Elena waited. "Last night, when you danced, I saw something I didn't expect. Not the technical skill, though that was extraordinary. I saw someone who'd survived hell and turned suffering into something beautiful." He paused. "I've spent 15 years trying to transform my grandfather's empire into something defensible, trying to take poison and transmute it into something that wouldn't destroy everyone it touched. I failed. But watching you dance, I understood for the first time what that kind of transformation actually looks like." "Lucian, let me finish. Please." He leaned forward, and Elena saw something raw in his eyes. "You spent 7 years in my house searching for evidence to destroy me. You had every right, every justification. And when you finally found proof that could have buried me forever, you chose to tell the truth instead. Not a convenient truth. Not a truth that served your revenge. Just truth. I don't understand what you're saying." "I'm saying that you're a better person than I ever learned to be." You had the chance to become exactly what my grandfather was. Someone who uses pain as justification for cruelty, who turns suffering into a weapon, who destroys without caring about collateral damage. And you refused. His voice roughened. You chose something harder. You chose to separate guilt from innocence, even when it would have been easier to paint everyone with the same brush. That takes strength I don't have. Elena's throat closed. You're giving me too much credit. I just told the truth. You told the truth even though it meant protecting me. That's not nothing. Lucian's hands clenched in the cuffs. If things were different, if I wasn't going to prison, if this empire wasn't imploding, if we'd met in any other context. He stopped. Never mind. That's fantasy. This is reality. 1 minute, the marshal said. What about your mother? Elena asked, suddenly remembering. Your mother must be devastated. Pain flickered across Lucian's face. She's known for years that this was coming, that the empire couldn't last forever, that eventually the sins would catch up. He paused. She loved my father. Whatever he did, whatever compromises he made, she loved him. And she's always believed my grandfather murdered him, even without proof. Learning she was right will break her heart all over again. I'm sorry, Elena said, meaning it. Don't apologize for my family's sins. You've already been more generous than we deserved. Lucian stood as the marshals moved to escort him out. Elena, one last thing. Yes? Whatever you build with your freedom, make it count. Make it something that would have made your parents proud. Don't waste it on bitterness or grief or anything that keeps you tethered to the past. His smile was sad. One of us should get to escape this. Let it be you. Then the marshals took him away, and Elena was alone in the conference room with the ghost of a conversation that felt like goodbye. She left the federal building at 2 a.m. to find Mrs. Chen waiting outside in an old sedan. I thought you might need a ride, the older woman said. Unless you have somewhere else to be? Elena didn't. She climbed into the passenger seat, and Mrs. Chen drove through Manhattan's empty streets without asking where they were going. You surprised me tonight, Mrs. Chen said finally. I thought you'd want Lucian to suffer, to pay for everything his family took from you. I did want that. For 7 years, that's all I wanted. Elena stared out the window at the city lights. But somewhere between planning revenge and actually achieving it, I realized I didn't want to become the kind of person who destroys without distinction. My father wouldn't have wanted that, and my mother ran away specifically to prevent it. So what do you want now? Elena considered the question. What did she want? The truth was out. The empire was falling. Justice was being served, however imperfectly. But none of that filled the hollow space where her obsession had lived for 7 years. I want to dance again, she said slowly. Not for survival. Not because someone's holding a gun to my head. Just because it's beautiful and true, and it's the one thing they couldn't take from me. She paused. My mother used to say dance was the only honest language she knew. I think I finally understand what she meant. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I have something for you. She pulled over near Central Park and retrieved a manila envelope from the glove compartment. I've been holding on to this for 7 years, waiting for the right moment to give it to you. Elena opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter in her mother's handwriting, dated 1 week before she died. The letter was short, painfully short for a lifetime of secrets finally confessed. My darling Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've learned the truth. I spent your whole life hiding. I'm sorry. Sorry for running instead of fighting. Sorry for teaching you to be invisible when you should have been seen. Sorry for leaving you alone with this burden. But I need you to understand something. I don't regret running. I don't regret choosing your life over revenge. Given the choice between justice and keeping you safe, I would choose you every single time. By now you've probably thought about going back, about finding evidence, exposing the truth, making them pay. Part of me hopes you won't, that you'll let it go and live the life I wanted for you, free, happy, unburdened by the past. But I know you, my fierce girl. I know you won't let it go. You have your father's stubbornness and my rage, and those together are a dangerous combination. So if you do go back, if you do fight, remember this. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about protecting the innocent. Don't let revenge make you blind to that distinction. Don't become what you're fighting against. Your father loved this city, loved the possibilities it represented, the chance to build something good and lasting. That's what they stole from him. Not just his life, but his dream. If you get the chance to build something, build the dream he never got to finish. Make something good. Make something that lasts. I love you. I'm proud of you. And wherever I am when you read this, I'm cheering for you. Always, Mom. Elena read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, her mother's words reshaping the anger she'd carried for so long. She knew, Elena whispered. She knew I'd go back. She knew I wouldn't let it go. She knew you, Mrs. Chen said gently, and she loved you enough to give you permission to fight while reminding you not to lose yourself in the fighting. But how did you get this? Your mother sent it to me 3 days before she died, along with a substantial sum of money and instructions to give you both when the time was right. Mrs. Chen's expression was soft. She researched the Vale family after she ran. Found out I'd worked there for years. Somehow convinced herself I could be trusted to help her daughter if you ever came back. She paused. She was right. The moment you walked through those doors 7 years ago using her maiden name, I knew exactly who you were, and I've been watching over you ever since. You knew the whole time? I knew. I verified your identity within a week. I've been protecting you, guiding you, and yes, documenting everything I could about the Vale Empire so that when the moment came, you'd have more than just your word against theirs. Mrs. Chen reached over and squeezed Elena's hand. Your mother asked me to keep you safe. I did my best. Elena couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. All those years of thinking she was alone, that she was risking everything on her own, she'd had a guardian she never knew existed. The money your mother sent, Mrs. Chen continued, I invested it, grew it. It's yours now. Not a fortune, but enough to start over, enough to build something. She pulled out another envelope. Bank details, account numbers. It's all legal, all documented. Your mother made sure of that. Elena stared at the envelope, her mother's final gift, and felt something break open in her chest. Not grief this time. Something else. Something that felt almost like hope. What do I do now? She asked. Whatever you want. You're free, Elena Kozlov. Actually, truly free. No more hiding, no more revenge. No more living in the shadow of your father's murder. Mrs. Chen's smile was warm. The question is, who do you want to be now that you're not defined by what was taken from you? Elena didn't have an answer. Not yet. But for the first time in 7 years, she had the space to figure it out. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in a dance studio in Brooklyn, watching a dozen children learn basic positions from an instructor who clearly cared more about discipline than joy. The studio was run down, funded by grants and donations, serving kids from neighborhoods where the arts were a luxury most families couldn't afford. It was perfect. Elena waited until the class ended, then approached the director, a tired woman in her 50s who looked like she'd been fighting budget cuts and bureaucracy for decades. I'd like to make a donation, Elena said, and I'd like to teach, if you'll have me. The director looked her up and down, taking in Elena's thrift store clothes and nervous energy. You have experience? My mother trained at the Mariinsky Theater. She taught me everything she knew. Elena paused. I'm not professional. I've never performed except once, under circumstances I'd rather not discuss. But I know dance, and I know what it's like to have it taken from you and to fight to get it back. Something in the director's expression softened. We can't pay much. $10 an hour, 2 classes a week to start. I don't need much. I just need to dance again, to teach something beautiful to kids who might never have another chance to learn it. The director extended her hand. When can you start? Today? Now. Whenever you need me. That afternoon, Elena taught her first class. 12 kids ranging from 8 to 14, most of them awkward and uncertain, all of them looking at her like she might be another adult who'd promise things and disappear. Elena showed them basic positions, taught them how to stand, how to move, how to find grace in bodies that were still growing into themselves. She saw flashes of her younger self in their faces, the hunger for something beautiful, the fear of not being good enough, the desperate hope that maybe this could be the thing that saved them. When class ended, a small girl with dark hair approached her shyly. Are you coming back? The girl asked. Or was this just one time? Elena knelt down to the girl's level. I'm coming back, every week, for as long as you want to learn. The girl's smile was worth more than anything the Vale fortune could have bought. Over the following weeks, Elena built a routine. Teach dance classes, study for her GED, Her education had been interrupted by her mother's illness, and she'd never finished high school. Visit the lawyers handling her father's estate claim. Avoid news coverage about the Vale Empire's collapse and Lucian's pending trial. That last part was harder than she expected. The trial was everywhere. National news, cable television, true crime podcasts. Everyone wanted a piece of the story about the crime family brought down by a dancing housemaid and 30 years of buried secrets. Prosecutors were seeking life sentences for Lucian and several other high-ranking family members. Victoria had indeed received immunity and was living under a new identity somewhere far from New York. Mrs. Chen had retired with a quiet dignity, her role in the Empire's collapse acknowledged but not sensationalized. And Elena's father was finally being remembered as a victim rather than a footnote in the Vale family's history. Justice, Elena discovered, was messy and incomplete and never quite as satisfying as she'd imagined during 7 years of planning revenge. 6 months after that night in the storage room, Elena received a letter forwarded through her lawyers. The return address was a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania. She almost didn't open it, almost threw it away without reading. But something, curiosity, or maybe the memory of a 5-minute conversation in a federal building, made her break the seal. Elena, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you'll care about anything I have to say, but I'm writing anyway because some things need to be said even if no one listens. I took a plea deal. 25 years, eligible for parole in 15. I'm providing testimony against everyone still involved in the organization. By the time this goes to trial, there won't be a Vale Empire left to fight over. My mother died last month. Heart failure, the doctors said, but I think it was grief. She spent her whole life loving my father and mourning the man he could have been if my grandfather hadn't corrupted him. Learning the truth about how he died, it was too much. Before she died, she asked me to tell you something. She said she was sorry. Sorry that marrying into the Vale family destroyed your family. Sorry that she didn't know, didn't stop it, didn't do something to make it right. I don't know if an apology from a dead woman means anything to you, but she wanted you to know. As for me, I've had a lot of time to think in here, about the empire I inherited, the choices I made, the people I hurt while telling myself I was better than my grandfather. You were right about me. I'm not my grandfather, but I'm not innocent either. I built my version of the empire on his foundation, and all the good intentions in the world don't change the fact that I profited from your father's murder. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm not asking for it. But I want you to know that if I could go back, if I could make different choices, I would. I heard you're teaching dance in Brooklyn, that you're building something good from the ashes of everything that burned down. I'm glad. Someone should get to build the dream instead of just destroying nightmares. Thank you for telling the truth about me, for making the distinction between guilt and inherited sin. It probably saved me 10 years in here, which means I might actually get out before I'm 60. More importantly, thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. Not the power to destroy, but the courage to choose justice over revenge, even when revenge would have been easier. I hope your father would have been proud of the person you've become. I hope your mother is... Lucian. Elena read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into the box where she kept her mother's letter and the few photographs she had of her father. She didn't write back, didn't know what she would say if she did, but she didn't throw the letter away either. Some stories she was learning didn't have neat endings. Some wounds healed crooked. Some justice came incomplete. And some people existed in the gray space between victim and villain, guilty and innocent, destroyed and redeemed. Lucian Vale was serving time for his crimes. Her father's murder was finally acknowledged. The empire built on blood and theft was dismantled. It wasn't everything Elena had wanted when she first walked into that mansion 7 years ago. But it was enough. And now, finally, she could start building the life her parents never got to live. 1 year after the empire fell, Elena stood in front of the Manhattan mansion that had once belonged to her father and felt nothing. Not rage, not grief, not even the bitter satisfaction of vindication. Just a strange, hollow peace that came from finally letting go of something that had defined her for too long. The legal battles had concluded 3 months earlier. After depositions, hearings, and enough paperwork to fill a small warehouse, the court had ruled that the property seizure in 1998 had been fraudulent. The mansion, along with several other assets originally belonging to Alexei Kozlov, were legally Elena's. She'd put it on the market immediately. Now she stood on the sidewalk watching potential buyers stream through the front entrance. Wealthy families, real estate developers, someone's assistant taking photos for an overseas investor. People who saw expensive square footage in a prime location, not the blood-stained history embedded in every wall. "You're sure about this?" Mrs. Chen stood beside her, older and more frail than she'd been a year ago, but still sharp-eyed and observant. "That house is worth 40 million at least. You could keep it, turn it into something else." "I don't want to turn it into anything. I want it to stop being part of my story." Elena pulled her coat tighter against the November wind. "Someone else can make new memories there. Better ones. Your father built it as a home, a place for his family to grow and thrive. My father's been dead for 28 years. Whatever dreams he had for that house died with him." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not going to resurrect ghosts. I'm going to honor what he wanted by building something new." Mrs. Chen smiled. "Your mother would be proud of you." "I hope so." Elena checked her phone. She had 90 minutes before her evening dance class, enough time for what she needed to do next. "Are you sure you're okay getting home? I can call a car." "Child, I'm 73, not deceased. I can manage a taxi." Mrs. Chen squeezed Elena's hand. "Go do whatever mysterious errand has you checking your watch every 5 minutes. I'll see you next week for tea." Elena watched the older woman hail a cab with practiced efficiency, then turned and walked 6 blocks to a building she'd visited only once before, the federal courthouse where Lucian's trial had taken place. She wasn't here for a trial today. She was here for something else entirely. The visitor processing took 40 minutes. Background check, metal detectors, paperwork. A stern lecture from a guard about approved topics of conversation and the consequences of smuggling contraband. Finally, she was escorted through a series of locked doors to a visiting room where inmates met with lawyers and approved family members. Lucian sat at a metal table wearing prison-issue clothing that made him look smaller somehow, less dangerous, almost human. A year in federal prison had changed him, sharpened his features, added gray at his temples, given his eyes a hollow quality that came from too much time alone with regrets. He looked up when Elena entered, and she saw shock flash across his face before he controlled it. "Elena." Her name came out rough, like he'd forgotten how to say it. "I didn't know you were coming. They didn't tell me. I didn't tell them who I was. Just said I was a witness from your case who needed to ask follow-up questions." Elena sat down across from him, separated by the metal table but no glass barrier. "I wasn't sure they'd approve a visit if they knew my real identity." "Why are you here?" It was the question Elena had been asking herself for 3 weeks, ever since she'd decided to come. She still didn't have a complete answer. "The mansion sold," she said finally. "Closed escrow yesterday. I thought you should know." Lucian's expression didn't change. "Congratulations. 40 million? 42. Bidding war between a tech executive and a hedge fund manager." Elena paused. "I'm donating half to a victims advocacy fund. People your grandfather hurt, families your empire destroyed. It won't fix what happened, but it's something." "And the other half?" "Building something. A dance academy and community center. Free classes for kids who can't afford them. Safe space for survivors who need somewhere to heal." Elena met his eyes. "I'm calling it the Kozlov Foundation, after my father. So his name means something besides just another victim in your family's history." Something shifted in Lucian's expression. Grief, maybe, or recognition of the justice in that choice. "That's good," he said quietly. "That's better than good. Your father would have liked that." "I think he would have." Elena folded her hands on the table. "But that's not why I'm here." "Then why?" Elena took a breath. "Because I've spent a year trying to move forward, trying to build something new, and I keep getting stuck on the same question. What do I owe the people who hurt me? Not vengeance. I don't want that anymore. But also not forgiveness, because some things can't be forgiven. So what's left between those extremes?" Lucian studied her for a long moment. "If you're asking me to tell you how to feel about what my family did to yours, I'm not. I'm asking what you think justice actually looks like when the damage is already done and can't be undone." "I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that question." "You're the only person who can answer it. You're the one living with the consequences of your family's choices. You're the one who has to figure out if redemption is even possible or if some sins are too deep to wash out." Elena leaned forward. "So tell me, After a year in here, after losing everything, after watching your empire collapse and your family scatter, do you think you're paying for your crimes or just suffering consequences that don't actually balance the scales? The question hung between them like a blade. Lucian was quiet for so long, Elena thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. I think justice is a story we tell ourselves to make sense of suffering. A way to convince ourselves that pain has meaning, that wrongs can be righted, that the universe has some kind of moral balance. He paused. But the truth is messier. My grandfather murdered your father and stole his fortune. I can't give you back your childhood. I can't resurrect the dead. I can't undo 28 years of your family living in fear and poverty while mine lived in luxury built on your father's bones. So what can you do? I can acknowledge the truth. I can stop defending the indefensible. I can testify against everyone who helped build and maintain that empire. Lucian's hands clenched on the table. And I can spend every day for the rest of my life knowing that no amount of good I do will ever balance what was taken from you. That's not justice. It's just truth. And maybe truth is the only thing we actually owe each other. Elena felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. Not forgiveness. She still wasn't ready for that, might never be ready for that, but something close to understanding. I got a letter last month, she said quietly, from a woman named Sarah Chen. She said she was your mother's nurse during her final weeks. She said your mother wanted me to have something, but died before she could arrange it properly. Lucian's expression shifted to surprise. What did she want you to have? A collection of photographs and letters. Your father's personal papers that your mother had kept hidden for years. Elena pulled a folded paper from her pocket, a photocopy of a letter dated 2 months before Lucian's father died. This was in the collection. I think you should see it. She slid the paper across the table. Lucian picked it up with shaking hands and read his father's handwriting, words written nearly 2 decades ago. Elena had memorized it. She watched Lucian's face as he read his father's confession, how he'd discovered Alexei Kozlov's murder years after the fact, how he'd tried to make amends quietly by supporting refugee programs and immigrant advocacy, how he'd planned to expose everything despite knowing it would destroy the family, how he feared his own father would stop him permanently if he moved too quickly. He knew, Lucian whispered. My father knew about your father's murder. He was trying to fix it. And your grandfather killed him for it, just like he killed mine. Elena's voice was steady. Your mother included a note with the papers. She said your father would have wanted me to know that he died trying to do the right thing, that he regretted not acting sooner, that he was sorry. Lucian set the letter down carefully, his hands trembling. Why are you telling me this? Because for a year I've been trying to separate you from your family's sins, trying to figure out if you deserve blame for inheriting an empire you didn't build, or if you deserve credit for trying to change it. Elena paused. And I realized I can't make that determination for you. Only you can decide who you want to be in relation to what your grandfather did and what your father tried to fix. What do you want from me, Elena? I want you to help me. The request clearly shocked him. Help you with what? The foundation I'm building. It needs expertise I don't have. Understanding of how criminal organizations work, how to identify vulnerable populations, how to reach people who've been taught not to trust institutions. Elena met his eyes. You spent 15 years running a criminal empire. You know how these systems operate from the inside. I need that knowledge to build something that can actually help people instead of just making me feel better about donating money. You want me to consult on your foundation from federal prison? I want you to do whatever you can from where you are. Phone consultations, written recommendations, connections to people who might be willing to help if you vouch for the project. Elena leaned forward. I'm not asking you to do this because I forgive you, or because I think it balances any scales. I'm asking because you have knowledge that could help people, and letting that knowledge die in here because of pride or punishment seems wasteful. Lucian stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. The prosecutors wouldn't allow it. I'm not supposed to have any contact with criminal enterprises or community organizations that might— I already spoke to them. They're willing to grant an exception if the foundation submits to regular audits, and you have no financial interest or decision-making authority. You'd be purely advisory. Elena pulled out another paper. This is the agreement their office drafted. You'd need to review it with your lawyer, but it's legitimate. Why? Lucian's voice cracked. After everything my family took from you, why would you want my help with anything? Elena had asked herself that question 1,000 times while preparing for this visit. The answer still felt incomplete, but it was honest. Because my mother spent 20 years teaching me that dance was the only honest language she knew. And I've spent the last year learning that building something true requires using every resource available, even uncomfortable ones. She paused. You're a resource. You have knowledge I need. Whether I like you or hate you or feel nothing at all, that knowledge could help kids who are growing up the way I did, scared and invisible, and convinced the world doesn't want them to exist. So this is purely transactional. No. If it was purely transactional, I'd hire a consultant who didn't spend 15 years running a criminal empire. Elena's voice softened. This is me trying to do what my father would have done. Build something good, even when it means working with people who've done bad things. This is me choosing to believe that redemption might be possible even when justice is incomplete. I don't deserve your faith in redemption. Probably not, but the kids who'll benefit from the foundation deserve every advantage I can give them, including your expertise, uncomfortable as that is for both of us. Elena stood. Think about it. Talk to your lawyer. If you decide you can't do it, I'll understand. But if you decide you can... She pulled out a business card with the foundation's information. Contact information is there. We start classes in 3 months. I'd like your input before then if possible. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The letter from your father, your mother wanted you to have the original. I made copies for the legal record, but the actual letter is yours if you want it. Oh, why would she give you my father's personal papers instead of me? Because she thought I'd make sure you saw them even if it hurt. She thought I'd give you truth instead of comfort. Elena's smile was sad. She was right. She left the visiting room without waiting for his response, processing back through security and locked doors until she emerged into cold November air that felt like freedom. 3 weeks later, Elena received a thick envelope at the Foundation's temporary office. Inside was a 40-page document written in Lucian's precise handwriting, detailing vulnerabilities in community support systems, red flags for predatory recruitment by criminal organizations, and specific recommendations for protective programs targeting at-risk youth. It was professional, thorough, and exactly what Elena needed. A handwritten note was clipped to the front page. I can't undo what my family did to yours. But maybe I can help make sure fewer families are destroyed the same way. If that's worth anything to you, I'm available for consultation as the prosecutors allow. L. Elena filed the document, extracted the most useful recommendations, and began implementing them into the Foundation's programming. She didn't write back, didn't acknowledge receipt beyond a brief email confirming the Foundation had his materials and would be in touch if further consultation was needed. But she kept the note. 6 months after that visit, the Kozlov Foundation opened in a renovated warehouse in Brooklyn. Elena had purchased the building with money from the mansion sale, a cavernous space with high ceilings perfect for dance studios, meeting rooms for support groups, office space for counselors and social workers. On opening day, 200 people showed up. Kids excited about free dance classes, parents grateful for safe after-school programs, survivors of trafficking and exploitation looking for community and resources, local politicians wanting photo opportunities, reporters covering the story of how a housemaid brought down a crime family and built something beautiful from the ruins. Elena stood in the main studio watching children learn basic positions from instructors she'd carefully vetted and felt her mother's presence like a hand on her shoulder. This was what her father had wanted to build, something good and lasting. This was what her mother had died believing was impossible, justice that helped rather than just punished. And this was what Elena had built from 7 years of invisible servitude and 1 night of dancing for her life. Mrs. Chen found her standing there, tears streaming down her face, and wrapped her in a careful hug. "They'd both be so proud," the older woman whispered. "Your parents, they'd be so proud of who you've become." "I hope so. I really hope so." The foundation grew quickly. Within a year, they'd expanded programming to include trauma counseling, job training, legal assistance for immigrants, and partnerships with schools in underserved neighborhoods. Elena hired staff who understood the communities they served. Former dancers who'd aged out of companies and needed new purpose. Social workers who'd survived their own traumas. Teachers who believed every child deserved beauty in their lives regardless of economic circumstances. And every month, like clockwork, she received consultation documents from Lucian. Insights about territorial recruitment patterns. Analysis of protection racket vulnerabilities. Recommendations for security measures that wouldn't make participants feel policed. They never spoke directly. never acknowledged the strange partnership that had developed, a criminal serving time for racketeering helping to build programs that prevented others from following his path. It was too complicated to explain, too morally ambiguous to defend. But it worked. 2 years after the foundation opened, Elena received notice that Lucian had been transferred to a minimum security facility as a reward for good behavior and cooperation with ongoing investigations. His sentence had been reduced to 20 years with possibility of parole in 12 due to substantial assistance to prosecutors. She didn't visit, didn't write, just noted the information and continued building. Then, 3 years after that first visit, she received a call from an unknown number. "Miss Kozlov? This is the warden at Lewisburg Federal Prison. I'm calling because Lucian Vale listed you as an emergency contact. There's been an incident." Elena's stomach dropped. What kind of incident? Vale was attacked by another inmate this morning, someone connected to an organization he testified against. He's stable now, but... The warden paused. "He's asking to see you, says it's important. You're under no obligation, of course. But given that he has no other family willing to visit, I'll be there tomorrow," Elena heard herself say. The warden gave her details, and Elena hung up feeling like she'd just made a decision she couldn't unmake. Mrs. Chen found her sitting in her office, staring at her phone. "What's wrong?" Elena explained. Mrs. Chen sat down heavily in the visitor's chair. "You don't owe him anything," the older woman said carefully. "You've already been more generous than anyone could expect." "I know. But you're going anyway." "I don't know why. It doesn't make sense. He's not my friend. He's not my family. He's just..." Elena struggled for words. "He's someone trying to do better, and maybe that's enough reason." She drove to Pennsylvania the next morning, processed through security again, and was escorted to a medical wing where inmates recovered from injuries. Lucian lay in a narrow bed looking worse than she'd ever seen him, bruised, stitched, one arm in a cast. But his eyes were clear when he saw her enter. "You came," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "The warden said it was important." Elena sat in the chair beside his bed. "What happened?" "Someone from the Vega organization decided to make a point about cooperation with federal prosecutors. They paid an inmate to send a message." He gestured vaguely at his injuries. "Message received. Are you safe now?" "I'm in protective custody until they transfer me to a different facility. I'll be fine." He paused. "That's not why I asked you to come." "Then why?" Lucian shifted carefully, wincing at the movement. "Because I'm up for parole review in 2 years, and I needed to ask you something before I submitted my application." Elena waited. "The parole board will want victim statements. Testimony about whether they think I've been rehabilitated, whether I pose a continuing threat, whether I deserve early release." His pale eyes met hers. "You're the most prominent victim in my case. Your testimony will carry weight, and I need to know, if they ask you, what will you say?" It was the question Elena had been avoiding for 5 years. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me thinks you should serve every day of your sentence. That 20 years isn't enough for 15 years of running a criminal empire, regardless of your cooperation or good behavior." "And the other part?" "The other part thinks punishment without possibility of redemption is just cruelty wearing justice's mask." Elena's voice shook slightly. "I think you've done terrible things. I think you profited from my father's murder, even if you didn't commit it. I think you're guilty of crimes that destroyed lives. But I also think you've spent 5 years trying to make amends, testifying against your former associates, helping build programs to prevent others from following your path, consulting on a foundation that's helped hundreds of people." She paused. "I think you're still guilty, but I also think you're different than you were. And maybe that's worth something. So if they ask you, what will you tell the parole board?" Elena took a breath. "I'll tell them the truth, that you're guilty, that you hurt people, that your family destroyed mine, but also that you've spent your incarceration trying to do better, that you've provided valuable expertise to victim services programs, that you've cooperated fully with authorities." She met his eyes. "I'll tell them I don't forgive you, but I also don't think keeping you locked up past the minimum necessary time serves any purpose except revenge. And I'm done with revenge." Lucian's expression was unreadable. "That's more than I deserve." "Probably. But it's the truth, and truth is what I owe. Not comfort, not punishment, just truth. If I get parole, if they let me out in 2 years, I won't contact you, won't try to insert myself into your life or the foundation. You've given me more than I had any right to ask for. I won't abuse that. Good. Elena stood. I hope you heal quickly, and I hope the next facility is safer. Elena? Lucian's voice stopped her at the door. Thank you for coming, for telling me the truth, He stopped. For seeing the difference between who I was and who I'm trying to become. Not many people bothered to look for that distinction. My mother taught me to look for it. She spent 20 years proving that people could change, could run from their worst selves and build something better. Elena's smile was sad. I guess I learned the lesson too well to unlearn it now. She left without waiting for his response. 2 years later, Elena sat in a parole hearing as a witness. She told the truth about Lucian's crimes, about his cooperation, about his genuine efforts at rehabilitation. She made no recommendations about what the board should decide, just presented facts as she understood them. The board granted parole with extensive conditions: continued cooperation with federal investigations, regular check-ins with parole officers, restrictions on business activities, and association with former criminal contacts. Lucian was released 3 weeks later. Elena heard about it through news coverage, not from him directly. He kept his promise. No contact, no attempts to insert himself into her life. But 6 months after his release, the foundation received a substantial anonymous donation with a note. For the kids who deserve better than what we got. Use it well. Elena knew who'd sent it, didn't acknowledge it publicly, but added the funds to their scholarship program and watched it help another 50 children access dance classes they couldn't otherwise afford. 5 years after the foundation opened, Elena stood on a stage in the main studio watching her advanced students perform a recital for parents and community members. The piece they'd choreographed told a story of transformation, of pain becoming beauty, of survival becoming strength, of individuals finding power in community. It was everything her mother had taught her dance could be. After the performance, after the applause and the tears and the proud parents taking photos, Elena found herself alone in the studio with the same small, dark-haired girl who'd asked if she was coming back on that first day. The girl was 14 now, tall and graceful, accepted into a prestigious dance academy with a full scholarship. Ms. Kozlov? The girl's voice was shy. I never thanked you for coming back, for staying, for... She gestured at the studio, at the foundation, at the life she'd built through dance. For all of this. Elena pulled the girl into a hug. You don't need to thank me. Just promise me something. Anything. Promise me that when you get where you're going, when you've built the life you want, you'll remember where you came from, and you'll help someone else climb up after you. I promise, the girl said solemnly. After she left, Elena stood alone in the empty studio, looking at the photographs on the wall. Pictures of students past and present, news clippings about the foundation's growth, a framed copy of her mother's letter, and in the corner, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, a small photograph of her father standing in front of the mansion before everything was stolen, young and hopeful and convinced he could build something lasting. She'd kept her promise to him, built something good from the ashes of what was destroyed, created legacy from loss. The foundation's main door opened. Elena turned, expecting a parent who'd forgotten something or a staff member working late. Instead, Lucian Vale stood in the doorway, older and grayer and wearing clothes that suggested a modest living rather than criminal fortune. He held a small envelope and looked uncertain, like he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I know I said I wouldn't contact you, but I needed to deliver this in person, and I'll leave right after, I promise. Elena's first instinct was anger, at the broken promise, at the invasion of her space, at the complication his presence represented. But looking at him, she saw something different than the man who'd held her life in his hands 7 years ago. She saw someone genuinely trying to rebuild a life from ruins, just like her. What is it? She asked. Lucian stepped forward carefully, like approaching a wild animal, and handed her the envelope. My parole ended last month. I'm fully released, no more conditions or check-ins, and I wanted you to have this before I left New York permanently. Elena opened the envelope. Inside was a check for an amount that made her breath catch, and a letter in Lucian's handwriting. Elena, this represents every penny of profit I personally made from the Vale Empire during the 15 years I ran it. I've spent the last 3 years working construction and living in a studio apartment, saving everything I could to make this payment. I can't give you back your childhood, can't resurrect your father or undo your mother's 20 years of fear, but I can return the money I made from the empire built on your father's murder. This is an atonement. The scales don't balance that way. This is just acknowledgement of a debt I can never fully repay. The foundation you're built is extraordinary. It's everything my father wanted the Vale fortune to become and never could make it. I'm grateful I got to contribute to it, even in my small way. I'm moving to Oregon next week, starting over completely. New city, new name, new life. I won't contact you again. This is goodbye. Thank you for teaching me that truth matters more than comfort and that justice doesn't always look like revenge. I hope you find peace. Lucian Elena read the letter twice, emotions warring in her chest. The check was genuine. She could see that from the bank details. More money than the foundation had raised in its entire existence. This is too much, she said finally. It's exactly what I owe. Maybe less. Lucian's voice was quiet. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know you could refuse it and be completely justified. But I needed to try. Needed to give back what never should have been mine in the first place. Elena looked at the check, at the letter, at the man who'd once terrified her and now just looked tired and human and genuinely remorseful. If I accept this, she said slowly, it goes entirely to the foundation. Scholarships, programming, expansion, not a penny goes to me personally. I wouldn't want it any other way. And you're really leaving? Really starting over? I am. Construction work in Portland. Small apartment. Quiet life. Maybe someday I'll build something good too, but smaller, humbler. His smile was self-deprecating. Turns out I'm pretty good with my hands when I'm not using them to run a criminal empire. Elena surprised herself by laughing. It was absurd. Standing in her foundation accepting money from the man whose family had destroyed hers, laughing about construction work and quiet lives. I don't forgive you, she said clearly. I want that understood. Accepting this money doesn't mean I forgive you or that we're even or that any of this is okay. I know. But I also don't hate you anymore. Somewhere between revenge and forgiveness, I found, Elena searched for the word. Indifference. No, that's not quite right. Acceptance, maybe. Acceptance that you're human and flawed and guilty, but also trying. And that trying counts for something even when it doesn't erase the past. That's more than I deserve. Probably. Elena folded the check carefully. This will change lives, you know. This donation, it'll fund scholarships for 50 kids, maybe more. It'll let us expand programming, hire more staff, reach neighborhoods we couldn't serve before. Good. That's... Lucian's voice caught. That's exactly what it should do. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Two people who'd been enemies and almost allies, and now just strangers with shared history. I should go, Lucian said finally. I've already violated my promise not to contact you. I won't make it worse by overstaying. Wait, Elena surprised herself again. Before you go, I want you to see something. She led him through the foundation's halls, showing him the studios where children learned to dance, the meeting rooms where survivors found community, the walls covered in photographs of students who'd transformed their lives through art and support. This is what you helped build, Elena said, not just with money or consultation, with your choice to tell the truth about your grandfather even when it destroyed your family legacy, with your decision to cooperate with prosecutors even when it put you in danger, with your willingness to use your knowledge to help instead of hide. Lucian's eyes were suspiciously bright as he looked at the photographs. I don't deserve credit for any of this. This is all you. It's not all me. It's my parents' dream. And Mrs. Chen's protection and your father's attempted redemption, and yes, your consultation and cooperation. Elena's voice softened. It takes a lot of people choosing to do better to build something good. You were one of those people, even if you were also one of the people who did terrible things first. I don't know how to hold both those truths at once, Lucian admitted, that I'm guilty and also trying to atone, that I hurt people and also help them, that I'm a criminal and also, what, redeemed? That doesn't feel like the right word. Maybe not redeemed, maybe just honest. Elena walked back toward the entrance, Lucian following. My mother used to say dance was the only honest language she knew because it couldn't lie about what the body felt. I think maybe the only redemption that matters is the kind that comes from being honest about what you've done and who you're trying to become. They reached the door. Lucian paused at the threshold, looking back at the foundation one last time. If I had met you some other way, he said quietly. If our family's histories weren't tangled up in murder and theft, If we'd just been two people trying to build something good. But we didn't, Elena interrupted gently. We met the way we met. Our histories are what they are. And this is where we ended up. Is this an ending? Or just... He gestured vaguely at the space between them. I think it's both. The ending of who we were when we met, and the beginning of whatever we become next. Separately. In different cities. Building different lives. Elena held out her hand. Goodbye, Lucian. I hope Portland treats you well. I hope you find peace. He shook her hand carefully, like sealing a treaty. Goodbye, Elena. Thank you for... He stopped. For everything. For truth and justice and mercy all at once. For showing me what real strength looks like. Then he left, walking out into the New York evening, and Elena watched him go without regret or relief, just acceptance. That night, lying in her small apartment surrounded by foundation paperwork and student performance recordings, Elena finally wrote a letter she'd been composing in her head for 7 years. Dear Mom and Dad, I found the truth you died protecting. I exposed the lies that built an empire on your bones. I made them answer for what they did, even though justice was incomplete and complicated and nothing like I imagined. But more importantly, I built something good and lasting. Something that would have made you proud. The Kozlov name means something now besides murder victim and stolen fortune. It means scholarships and safe spaces and second chances. It means kids who learn to dance even though they can't afford lessons. It means survivors who find community after trauma. I don't know if that balances the scales. I don't know if anything could. But it's something true and beautiful in a world that tried to bury us in lies. I miss you both. I wish you could see what I've built. But I think maybe you can. And I think maybe you're proud. I finally understand what you meant about dance being honest language. I finally understand why you ran instead of fought. And I finally understand that the best revenge is building something so good it makes the people who tried to destroy you irrelevant. Thank you for teaching me that. Thank you for everything. I love you. Always. Elena. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box with her mother's letter, her father's photograph, and the note Lucian had sent from prison 5 years ago. Pieces of a story that had finally reached something like conclusion. Not a perfect ending, not complete justice, but honest and earned and sufficient. Elena turned off the lights and lay down in a bed she'd bought with money from her father's restored estate, in an apartment she'd chosen because she wanted it rather than because she was hiding, in a life she'd built from the ruins of everything that had been stolen. And for the first time in 7 years, maybe in her entire life, she slept without nightmares. The next morning, Elena woke to her phone ringing. Mrs. Chen's voice was excited, younger sounding than it had been in years. Turn on the news, Channel 7, now! Elena fumbled for the remote. The morning news showed footage of federal agents raiding multiple locations across the city. The anchor's voice was breathless with breaking news energy. Final arrests in what prosecutors are calling the complete dismantling of the Vale criminal enterprise. 7 more individuals taken into custody this morning based on testimony from Lucian Vale and other cooperating witnesses. This concludes a 5-year investigation that began with the arrest of Vale himself and has resulted in over 40 convictions. Elena watched them show photographs of men she recognized from that night 7 years ago. Men who'd watched her dance for her life. Men who'd applauded her performance while running criminal operations that destroyed families. All of them finally facing justice. The anchor continued. In a related development, the Kozlov Foundation, established by Elena Kozlov, daughter of murder victim Alexei Kozlov, announced this morning a major expansion of programming funded by an anonymous donation. The foundation, which provides free dance instruction and support services to at-risk youth, will be opening 3 new locations across the city. Mrs. Chen's voice cut back in. Did you know? About the arrests? No. Lucian must have been testifying up until the moment he left the city. Elena felt something settle in her chest. He really did it. Helped dismantle the entire empire. And now you're expanding the foundation into the neighborhoods that empire used to control. That's poetry, child. Dark poetry, but poetry nonetheless. Elena smiled. My father would have liked that. Building something good exactly where the rot used to be. She spent the rest of the day fielding calls from reporters, coordinating with staff about the expansion, reviewing applications for the new locations. By evening, she was exhausted but satisfied. The foundation was growing beyond anything she'd imagined when she first opened the Brooklyn studio. A week later, Elena received one final letter. This one from a law firm in Portland, Oregon, forwarding documents Lucian had filed before leaving New York. Inside was a legal instrument transferring all remaining Vale family assets, holdings that had survived the criminal seizures, legitimate businesses that Lucian had personally owned, to the Kozlov Foundation, a trust structure that prevented him from ever reclaiming the assets or profiting from them in any way. The attached letter from Lucian was brief. Everything my grandfather built came from your father's murder. Everything I inherited came from that same poisoned source. I can't wash the blood off the money by giving it away, but I can at least make sure it's used for something clean. This is the last of it. The final piece. After this, the Vale fortune is gone, distributed to victims, to the foundation, to restitution payments. The empire is truly over. I hope the foundation uses it well. I hope the kids who benefit never know where the money came from or what sins it represents. I hope it just becomes resources that help them build better lives. Don't write back. Don't acknowledge this. Just build something beautiful and let that be enough. L. Elena sat with the documents for a long time, understanding what Lucian had done. He'd liquidated everything, given it all away, reduced himself to zero so completely that there was nothing left of the Vale Empire except records and memories and cautionary tales. And he'd given it all to her foundation, to kids who needed it, to the dream her father never got to build. It was the kind of ending that should have felt triumphant, complete victory, total vindication. Instead, it just felt quiet and final and surprisingly sad. That evening, Elena attended a performance by her advanced students. They'd choreographed a piece about transformation and hope, about rising from ashes and building new lives. Watching them move across the stage with grace and strength and beauty, Elena felt her mother's presence stronger than ever. This was what dance was supposed to be. Not survival, not revenge, just beauty and truth and the honest expression of human experience. After the performance, after the applause and the proud parents and the tearful goodbyes as some students graduated to professional companies, Elena stood alone in the empty studio. She removed her shoes, stepped into the center of the floor, and began to dance. Not the waltz she'd performed for her life 7 years ago. Something new. Something that told the story of a girl who lost everything, hid for years, found truth in lies, built beauty from ashes, and finally was free. She danced her father's murder and her mother's fear. She danced 7 years of invisible servitude and 1 night of impossible stakes. She danced federal agents and collapsing empires and complicated justice. And then she danced something new entirely. Hope, future, the possibility of a life not defined by what was taken, but by what she chose to build. When the dance ended, she stood in the center of the floor breathing hard, her cheeks wet with tears, her body exhausted and exhilarated. That was beautiful, a voice said from the doorway. Elena turned to find Mrs. Chen standing there, her elderly face soft with emotion. You saw. I saw. And I think your parents saw too, wherever they are. Mrs. Chen walked into the studio. You've done it, child. Everything you set out to do and more. You found the truth. You exposed the lies. You built something lasting and good. You can rest now. I don't think I know how to rest, Elena admitted. For so long, I've been driven by this need to make them answer, to make it right, to honor my parents' memory. Now that it's done, now you get to discover who Elena Kozlov is when she's not defined by revenge or justice or inherited trauma. Mrs. Chen smiled. That's the hardest part, in some ways. Building a life instead of just settling scores. Elena thought about that, about the foundation that would continue growing with or without her daily involvement, about the students who'd graduated to professional companies and the ones just starting their training, about the communities rebuilding where criminal empires once controlled. I think I'd like to dance again, she said slowly. Not teach, though I'll keep doing that, but perform, take class, audition for companies, do what my mother never got to do because my father was murdered and she spent her life running. Then do it. You've earned the right to live for yourself instead of for ghosts. That night, Elena submitted applications to 3 professional dance companies. She was older than typical company members, her training unconventional, her resume filled with gaps. But she was also extraordinary. Years of private instruction from a Mariinsky-trained dancer, natural talent honed by necessity, and a performance quality that came from dancing for her life and meaning it. Two of the companies rejected her immediately. Too old, insufficient formal training, no professional experience. The third company, a contemporary troupe known for taking risks and telling difficult stories, invited her to audition. Elena prepared for 3 weeks. She choreographed a solo piece that told her story without words, transformation from invisible to seen, from victim to survivor, from revenge to redemption. The audition was in front of the company's artistic director and principal dancers. Elena stepped onto the studio floor in bare feet and simple black clothing and poured everything she'd survived into movement. When she finished, the room was silent. Then the artistic director stood and applauded. "When can you start?" Elena joined the company 3 months later. She danced in performances across the city, traveled to festivals, told stories through movement that resonated with audiences who'd never know the specific truth behind her dancing, but recognized honesty when they saw it. And slowly, gradually, she built a life that belonged to her rather than to the ghosts she'd been serving. The foundation continued thriving under her advisory guidance, but with a professional director she'd hired to manage daily operations. The legal battles over her father's estate finally concluded with full restoration of assets and formal acknowledgement of his murder. The Vale Empire was completely dismantled, its members scattered to prisons or witness protection or exile. 5 years after Lucian left New York, Elena received one final communication, a postcard from Portland with no return address, and just 3 words in familiar handwriting. "Thank you. Peace found." She tucked the postcard into the box with all the other pieces of this story and closed it for the final time. 10 years after dancing for her life in a mansion ballroom, Elena Kozlov stood on a stage at Lincoln Center as a principal dancer with one of New York's most respected contemporary companies. She'd just finished performing a piece she'd choreographed herself, titled simply Truth, that had received a standing ovation. In the audience, she knew Mrs. Chen was crying with pride. Several of her former foundation students were there, some now dancing professionally themselves. Reporters were preparing reviews that would launch Elena into genuine prominence in the dance world. But standing in the wings, waiting for the final curtain call, Elena wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about her father, who dreamed of building something good and lasting in this city before violence cut his dreams short. She was thinking about her mother, who'd sacrificed everything to keep her daughter safe and taught her that beauty was the only honest language. She was thinking about 7 years spent invisible, searching for truth that would set her free. And she was thinking that maybe, finally, after all the grief and rage and complicated justice, she'd done what her parents never got to do. She'd built a life. Not perfect, not without scars, but true and earned and entirely her own. The curtain rose for the final call, and Elena stepped back into the light. Not as a victim, not as an avenger, not as someone defined by what was taken. Just as Elena Kozlov. Dancer, foundation founder, survivor, builder of beautiful things, free.